and I will let you know when it is up and running.
Hi.
Are we ready to go?
Let's give it one more minute. Jonathan, would you do me the favor and check the YouTube channel to see if it's up?
Yes.
I'm not seeing it up.
I am not seeing it either.
Hello, Andrew. Greg Wolf. Nice to see your face. Andrew is with the city attorney's office.
Hey, how you doing?
All right, so I have to troubleshoot the YouTube. It says it's going live on YouTube. May just be a delay.
All right, Greg, I am seeing it.
You are?
Yeah.
Great. All right, Chair. It's all yours.
7:03, so I'll call this Planning Commission meeting on May 4th to order. May I have a roll call, please?
Commissioner Radnich,
Commissioner Heising,
Commissioner Mason,
Commissioner LeBon, Chair.
Commissioner Sturm, did you get Commissioner Farsan?
Commissioner Farzan.
All right, thank you. Do I have a motion to adopt the agenda?
So moved.
second,
Second.
All in favor?
aye.
Aye.
Any
Aye.
opposed?
All right.
Motion carries unanimously. Do we have any public comments for items not on the agenda?
No, we do not.
Okay, moving on to the consent calendar. Do I have a motion to approve the consent calendar?
So moved.
Second,
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
aye,
Motion
Aye.
carries unanimously. Okay, so that we have no continued public hearings, so that brings us to item 7A, new public hearings. Wireless communication facility 0919, East Bay Municipal Utility District, owner Verizon, LR5 zoning.
And Jonathan, before you begin the staff report, will you advise me who is attending the Zoom meeting on behalf of the applicant?
That would be Steve Thomas.
Thank you.
Okay, we're ready for a staff report whenever you are.
All right, good evening, commissioners. The item before you tonight is WCF 09-19. It's a major wireless facilities permit for the installation of a new facility at unaddressed parcel on Gable Lane. Before I get into the specifics of the project, I first wanted to touch on the process for review and highlight some of the main components of our wireless ordinance. So the three areas I wanted to touch on are the thresholds for review, development standards, and then also the required findings. So thresholds for review are triggers that, if triggered, require the Planning Commission to review the project. So for example, a threshold for review is a wireless facility located within a residential zoning district, a monopole that exceeds the height of the zoning district, or a wireless facility that is visible from the public right of way. These are not development standards or required findings that have to be made, but they're, again, thresholds for review that require Planning Commission review. Development standards are a checklist of design criteria that the Planning Commission would have to make in order to approve the project. Some of those development standards relate to the number of poles, the setback of the facility, the lighting that's used, landscaping that's put into place, the architectural design of accessory structures, and that sort of thing. The development standards and staff's responses to those development standards can be found in the staff report. And then finally, we have the required findings for approval or findings for denial. The findings, one of those findings relates to the development standards and that the project adheres to the development standards or an exception is granted. So we have our two sets of required findings for this permit are a wireless facilities permit and a hillside development permit. Back to the project specifics. The project is proposed at an unaddressed parcel on Gable Lane. The property is owned by the East Bay Municipal Utility District, East Bay MUD, and it's zoned low density residential 5, LR5, but it's not used as a residential use. The site has a above grade water reservoir and an existing communications tower that's owned and operated by the City of Walnut Creek's Police Department. As we look to the adjacent properties, all of the adjacent properties are zoned for residential use and are located in the Hillside Overlay District. And all of the adjacent residences also are used as residential uses. This isn't the first time that the Planning Commission has reviewed a wireless facilities permit for this project. The Planning Commission in 2012 approved land use permit 03-12, which proposed a new monopole at this very site. The key differences between that land use permit and this wireless facilities permit is that the previous project proposed to replace the existing tower, where this project proposes an additional tower adjacent to it. Another key difference is the height of the tower. The previously approved height was for 50 feet, and this project is upwards of 60 feet. And then the last difference is the siding of the tower. The previously approved tower replaced the existing tower and was located just south of it, and now this proposed tower is located just to the east. Again, that permit was approved in 2012, but the applicant never pulled the building permit, and so that permit expired. The applicant will certainly get into this into more detail, but I just wanted to briefly explain why the city is seeing this project. So starting in 2012, the applicant identified a gap in service, a coverage gap in the Release Valley area of the city, specifically to a section of Release Valley that affected around 1,700 residents and around 15 square miles. That gap in service led to unreliable in-building service to Verizon customers. And this proposal attempts to fill in that gap in service. So the applicant has identified this site obviously as the leading candidate for the tower, but also took into consideration 5 alternative sites. And in summary, those sites were not found to be viable because it either required the monopole to be of a taller height, or was on a more visible property, or because of the site's location led to conflicts with Verizon's existing facilities in Lafayette. So the applicant evaluated the Gable Lane site to be the least intrusive, and staff would agree with that as well. As for the project design, the monopole is located again just to the east of the existing communications tower, in between the proposed structure and, sorry, the existing communication tower and the water reservoir up near the northern property line. It proposes a 60-foot monopole with with 9 antennas towards the 50-foot mark at the top, and also equipment surrounding the facility at ground level, overhead wires, and a utility pole leading from the public right-of-way at Release Valley to the monopole at the project site. Staff evaluated the project from public vantage points at lower elevations in line with our Hillside ordinance, and found that the proposed monopole would likely be visible from Release Valley Road at least at a couple of points, because the existing tower has a building height of 60 feet, and the proposed tower has that same height, and the existing tower is visible from those 2 locations. Staff has made the required findings for approval, and that's outlined in the draft resolution before you, finding that the project complies with the development standards as previously mentioned. And with that, staff recommends that the Planning Commission adopt Resolution 2020-12 approving the project subject to conditions. Here for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions of staff?
Yes, I have a
Commissioner?
question.
Commissioner Maggio?
I believe I was on the commission and I saw this back in 2012. Is there a reason why they don't want to combine their services on a single pole?
That is
That was
intent.
approved in 2012.
Yes, that was the intent of the land use permit approved in 2012, was to relocate Walnut Creek Police Department's antennas to the proposed pole.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the intent of this proposal, but the applicant has stated that they didn't want to include it as the scope of work, so not to give the police department a harsh deadline, that they would be able to do it at when convenient for them.
Commissioner Mason?
What is the process if they decide to go back in later and add more antennas? Is that purely a ministerial review, or would it have to come back through us?
Modifications to existing wireless facilities, especially one that would be impactful, like adding new antennas or increasing the height of the building, can be reviewed by the Planning Commission.
Then to follow up on that, if the eventual intent is to combine the Walnut Creek Police antennas with ours, would it be possible to amend this to give a maximum number of antennas to account for future usage, so we don't have to come back here?
I might ask our representative from the city attorney's office to see if that would be a viable condition of approval.
Jonathan, can you turn off screen sharing so I can sort of see everybody at one time? Thank you. Okay. Go ahead.
That's me. Hey, so I'm Andrew McCardle from Best Best and Krieger, I'm a telecom associate. Work with a lot of local governments. So I believe the question is, could you put is it a lifetime limit on the amount of antennas on this new tower? Or are you saying, is there a way to make it so that you wouldn't have to hear a permit request to install the police department's antennas on the new tower?
As I see it, we are asked to review this with a given number of antennas.
Mm-hmm.
The ultimate hope is that the Walnut Creek Police will add their antennas to our array, our monopole. So the question is, can the presentation has a fixed number of antennas? Can we basically just come back with the total number of antennas between both poles and make that our approved number, just so we don't have to go back through for another public hearing to add more antennas to an already existing monopole.
So it becomes a bit tricky because one, I haven't seen any sort of agreement or I guess way to verify how or when the police department's antennas are going to be moving. So you can't really obligate, since the police department is not a party to this application or this installation, can't really obligate them to do anything based on this permit. Like they would kind of be separate. So the modification process that I think Jonathan was referring to is more about if Verizon were to want to install an additional antenna array, for example, versus another party coming on. It would probably have to go through the permitting process just because the police department isn't involved in this application.
No, that's not what I'm asking. Can I, in other words, instead of saying, you know, we're approving as a 60-foot monopole with 5 antennas, can we just approve a 60-foot monopole with no more than 20 antennas?
Commissioner Mason, can I ask you a question? How would we determine, I mean, I understand what you're saying, like just streamline this and then knowing that a change is coming because the police department does at some point intend to move their antennas over, but I'm not clear as to how we would determine what the maximum is, or I feel like we'd probably need to see it again.
Well, as I see it, reading through all the comments and all the letters that people came through, the big complaint is the size, the electricity, and things like that, the height. It's not, you know, the number of antennas. So just to save the trouble of, you know, where people really aren't concerned, I don't think anybody's going to say that, hey, this is okay with 9 antennas, but it's not okay with, say, 12 antennas. I wanted to just give them an allowance for future antennas just in this public hearing, so that if it comes back, they need to change an antenna and a new antenna is a little bit larger, or if they want to add additional antennas for whatever reason, it could just be done ministerially, because I don't see that as a overriding public concern, at least based on the comments we've received so far.
Yeah, so I would say that I would just view them as distinct projects. It's hard to know how or where they would install those antennas on the pole. Perhaps they could go below the tree line. Perhaps they would have to go above the tree line. Like it would just really depend. They'd also have to do, I think, all the calculations for safety purposes to ensure that the installation of these new antennas or additional antennas would be safe given the current construction of this potential new pole. So, and again, since it's kind of like a distinct entity owning those, I just don't think you can, since they're not requested as part of this project, I don't think you can condition future antennas, kind of like it's almost like a pre-approval of a future project. It would just have to likely come back with whatever applicable code provisions were in place at the time that this, installation this future installation could occur.
Commissioner Heising, did you raise your hand earlier?
Yes, I did. Thank you, Chair. So quick question for Jonathan. Thanks for that staff report, by the way. I just had one question. You said the proposed pole is 60 feet in height, and the arrays are at the 50-foot mark. But when I'm looking at the plans, it looks like the arrays are at the top. So I'm trying to determine in my mind if the arrays are at 50 feet or at 60.
I can share my screen and take a look at the plans to see where that is.
Okay. And I didn't see any dimensioning from the array to the ground on the plans either. So it was a little hard to determine. I was looking at the north elevation to the left there. It showed them at the top.
Yes, yeah, I will stand corrected. It's towards the
Okay.
top.
All right, I just want to be clear. Okay, and then my other wasn't really a question, well, a clarification is, can you share with us and the audience what our purview is for radio frequency emissions and what we can or cannot rule on relative to that? I know we have a condition of approval proposed by staff that there's to be a report that comes back to the city to document that the proposed improvements are safe from a RF emission standpoint. So it's just hoping you could share a little information with all of us on that.
Yeah, so one of the findings is that findings for approval is that the project complies with all FCC regulations. And part of the applicant's submittal was an RF report demonstrating that at all public areas around the pole, from the bottom of the pole up to the top where a worker would hypothetically be setting up, that the RF emissions would be in line with the FCC's requirements. So staff can make that finding for approval. As it relates to, are you asking more about the potential health impacts related to?
Correct,
Okay.
because some of the comments were relative to health impacts. And with a report submitted by the applicant showing levels below the threshold that allowed, I just wanted to know what it is that our commission is being asked tonight. We're not, I guess I'll leave it at that.
Maybe I saw Mr. McArdle's hand go
Yeah.
up.
Hey,
Would you like
sure,
to
I can
respond?
jump in a bit just with some regulatory background. I think what you're getting at. So the federal government has preempted local governments in this regard and state governments. So essentially, with regard to RF emissions, the cities can only confirm compliance with FCC standards. You cannot regulate based off of the health effects or environmental effects of RF emissions, as long as those emissions comply with the FCC standards. So it's typically handled at one of two places, as an application requirement sometimes, and then as in here, a condition of approval after installation to ensure that the facility does in fact comply with the FCC standards. But beyond, confirming compliance with FCC regulations for RF emissions, you can't regulate based off of potential health effects.
Okay, thank you. That's exactly what I was wanting to hear. Thank you.
Sure.
Okay, any other questions for staff or Mr. McArdle? Commissioner Labange?
Thank you. I was curious on the two questions. On the alternative sites, is there a requirement to do 5 sites or do they, are there other alternatives that we haven't heard about? And maybe this is something for the applicant, but Jonathan, if you have any purview on that, and then I had one other question.
Yeah, the code doesn't specify.
I can't hear you.
I'm sorry. The code doesn't specify the number of.
Still,
Is that better?
Yeah,
Yeah.
you're gonna have to get closer.
Okay. The code doesn't specify the number of alternatives that needs to be assessed, just that and also for the alternative sites, that's only mentioned in the exceptions to the findings. So if the planning commission was not able to make one of the findings of approval, they would have to find that this is the least intrusive alternative in order to waive that finding.
And you mean least intrusive relative to the alternative sites?
Correct.
Okay, so I'm not, just bear with me for a second. If I'm going to be skeptical and you have 5 horrible alternative sites, wouldn't that not be a very good mechanism then? Because this might be the best of the what we see in front of us, but it doesn't mean it's necessarily the best sites. It just means it's the best from the ones we've been shown.
Yeah, if the applicant may be able to speak more on it, but the commission finds if an alternative, if one has not been assessed, then they can direct the applicant to establish why that one was not considered.
Okay. All right. And then you answered my second one, which is what happens if we turn down, but it sounds like if we turn that down, then we have to find that one of the other ones is a better alternative, basically. Is that, did I hear you correctly?
If this, are you saying if this siting is
If there was a finding that I couldn't make for this, what happens then?
if there's a finding that could not be made, then the planning commission can also find that, establish that there is a coverage gap, and that among the alternative sites assessed that this is the least intrusive, and that would waive one of the other findings.
Okay, so just so I'm clear, so at the end of the day, do we have to find one of these sites and it has to get approved? There's no other alternative?
Mr.
think-
McCarroll, do you want to, Jonathan, do you want to let him chime in?
Of course.
Sure, thank you. I just wanted to provide a bit more background, I think could help address the question a bit. This language, I did not write this part of the code, but this language pretty much comes from the test. Under federal law, cities cannot take actions that prohibit or effectively prohibit the provision of wireless services. And the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, which is the federal circuit that serves California, among other states, they established this significant gap test. So it's a two-part test. Essentially, step one is the applicant has to show that there is a significant gap in coverage. And then step two is to show that the proposed project is the least intrusive means of filling that gap. The way the kind of burden shifts when you're doing that assessment is to say, the applicant has to make a good faith effort to show that they considered alternatives and provide meaningful comparison of the alternatives. Once they've done that, then the burden would shift to the locality. So in the event that the city found that potentially this proposed project is not the least intrusive alternative, you would have to kind of identify, right, an actual technically feasible alternative that is less intrusive than this proposed project.
Okay, so the burden would be on us. Okay, well then I guess my other question would be, are there other cell towers in this service area that are not part of the 5 that were being solicited as alternatives?
I would ask the applicant to answer that question.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have.
Commissioner Radnich?
Thank you, Jonathan. I have one question. If you could just explain the difference between service light and exterior light. And I'm happy to wait for, to ask the applicant. I'm just bringing it up because condition of approval 22 references service lights, whereas earlier in the staff report on page 5 of 8, it says there's no exterior lighting being proposed as part of the project. So again, if it's applicable for you or if it's applicable for the applicant, I'm happy to wait and ask that question to the applicant as well. Again, just trying to understand the difference of service lights versus versus exterior lighting.
While the applicant is giving their presentation, I can look through the code to see if that's defined.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, I had one question, and Jonathan started to address it in his staff report, but and Mr. McCarroll addressed it. But my question is whether, so you said we can't obligate the Walnut Creek Police Department to move their equipment to the proposed tower. Is there anything that we could do that would sort of push things in that direction that we could require of the applicant? Like, I don't know if there's some precedent for this, but require some kind of communication with Walnut Creek Police Department or?
Sorry.
Either one of you is fine.
I got stuck on mute. Sorry about that. It would I'm not sure what, I guess, prior discussions have gone on with the police department. Another kind of factor that could come into play is potentially what agreement the police department has with the property owner, and if there's some leeway there. But generally, if the permit that they received, assuming the police department needed a permit for that installation, is still valid and in effect, then it makes it difficult for y'all to be able to kind of force them to move when they have a valid permit on it. Yeah, and I'm trying to think of a way that you could kind of get the applicant to work on it, but again, since you can't obligate the police to do anything, I'm not sure what action to have the applicant take, if that makes sense.
And then just to clarify, you also were saying that you can't see a scenario where we could, as part of this approval, address moving like their existing equipment to this pole, because really that like new project would need to go through the same process.
It would need to, whatever, I guess, the applicable permitting process would be at the time, depending on how quick or slowly that kind of move may occur. It would just be, I would say, I haven't seen such a scenario, but I would say it would, the safe bet would just to run it through whatever the applicable permitting process was at the time. I'm not sure, and I don't know if I saw this mentioned in the alternatives analysis. Perhaps the applicant will touch on it in their presentation, but I don't believe I saw any mention of that tower being considered like a replacement of that tower being considered as one of the alternatives. So I'm not sure if perhaps this topic may be discussed a bit more in the presentation, but that's one thing I'm not sure if they talked about.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I think we're ready for the applicant's presentation. So we're ready for the applicant's presentation whenever you are.
Thank you. Sorry, it just took me a minute to mute. I just wanted to thank you all for taking the time to consider our application tonight. When we design cell sites and try to locate them, we always have to balance a number of competing interests. And among those, of course, are meeting the coverage objective, and line of sight tends to be an important metric for this. Some lower frequencies that the cell phones use are able to penetrate buildings, but generally the higher frequencies can be obstructed by things like trees. So we're careful to try to make sure that cell sites have a decent view of the area that they're supposed to cover. And we also recognize that visibility is a big issue. So we're trying to balance both of those factors. In this case, we chose the location that we did because we thought it was a good balance of those factors. In particular, there are some trees that are taller than the proposed tower that are on this parcel. There are some others that are a little shorter, but in general, we felt like the signals from the cell site would be able to propagate reasonably well. We also chose the height of this tower in an effort to match the height of the existing tower because of our long-term objective to move the existing antennas over to this new tower. What we feel like in general, the tower is not very visible from most places, but we recognize that, beauty is in the eye of the beholder, and there are some locations where it's more visible than others. I wanted to just touch a bit on alternatives. As was discussed, we strive to find feasible alternatives. And in this particular area, because there are so many residences, we did not do a lot of consideration of residentially zoned parcels that are used for residential purposes. So most of our focus, like in this case, it's a residentially zoned parcel, but it's used for utility purposes. And that seemed to be a better fit, less intrusive way to build a site like this without bringing it so close to people's homes. The other alternatives that were identified in our analysis are similarly situated, either vacant or right of way, or other parcels that are used for utility purposes. If you read the alternatives analysis, you can see that there are several alternatives that were considered that turned out to be not as feasible for technical reasons as this one. And so, we discount some of those alternatives based upon how well they're able to achieve the coverage objective. So maybe you have more questions about that sort of thing, which I'm happy to get into. I didn't want to take a lot of your time with a presentation that repeats things that staff already said, or I'd rather focus most of the time answering your questions, but there was a question about a service light, which I just wanted to address. Because cell sites like this are relied upon for health and safety reasons, if there is a service outage that could happen at any time, it's important for Verizon cell phone technicians to go out to the site and try to repair it. So most sites that we design include a service light that is just inside the enclosure where the base station equipment is located. And those lights tend to be pointed down into the enclosure just so that the technician who's on site is able to see in the dark if he happens to be there at night and is able to work. Those lights tend to be on timers so that they run only for a couple of hours while the technician is there, and they automatically turn themselves off after that time expires. Hopefully that answered your question. But I know you may have many other questions that I'd love to be able to answer for you.
Thank you. Any other questions for the applicant? Commissioner Labange?
Okay, thank you for talking to us on this. So this is the first time I've dealt with this in this role, so some of these are just getting me familiar, so bear with me, please. I'm just curious why, is there a reason why a stealth design is not encouraged or used? I did read, so that's my first question. I have a few, but I'm just curious on that, because most people, at least the comments I read, either, well, the environmental ones, which we already discussed, and we're kind of not discussing that, or there are definitely ones about fire safety with the generator and the fuel, and that's a different one. But then there were a few, and I actually went and saw some from some people who recommended places. It was just a visibility thing. And so while I and my daughter and I always like to point out really ridiculous looking stealth towers, I'm just curious why, what goes into that decision, if you could help on that question.
Sure. We frequently actually design stealth towers, some that look like trees, or the ones that you've seen before. And I admit that there are a lot of tree poles that don't look good, but there are also a lot of tree poles that do look good. I think actually one of those would work just fine in this location, but cell sites that mimic the appearance of natural features are not permitted under the code in Lafayette. So that's why we didn't propose it in this case. Beyond that, what we try to do is try to come up with a design that looks like it fits the area. So other types of stealthy designs just didn't, we didn't have a good one that we thought would belong in this setting with all the trees around it. The closest connection we could really find was the fact that it's used for utility purposes. And I'm not sure of any good stealthy cell site designs that really match with water tanks in particular. We're open to other designs if we can identify some that are appropriate, but it's not an obstacle for us to put a tree pole, for example. We do it frequently.
Okay, thank you. Let me ask a different question. This is on the alternative. If I don't know the economics of how this works, but I assume that you have to pay some kind of fee to East Bay Mud to easement rights or something like that. I'm assuming there's some economic exchange, and I'm not really concerned with what it is, but I'm still concerned with that the alternatives are done right. Is it possible that there's a better alternative, but the cost is such that maybe, and I'm asking you to be straightforward here, maybe you guys don't like the alternative because it's 3 times what, say, this other one is. So in your mind, that's not a good alternative. So it doesn't show up on the list of 5 alternatives. Is that possible?
In this case, that's not the case. I'm certainly, financial considerations do get thought about. But in this case, I'm not aware of any other cell sites in the area. And, we haven't negotiated with every other property owner. So I can't tell you what amount of rent they would have demanded to build a cell site like this. I know, like several of the others are also East Bay Mud properties that we could have worked a similar deal for. It just didn't happen to be technically as good for this project. And the alternatives analysis goes through several reasons why we made the choices we did. But in this case, I'm not aware of other cell sites in this coverage area that would provide the coverage we need.
Okay, so just thank you. And then I'll just confirm that last one, which is my question. So there aren't other cell towers out there that you aren't on the list in this service area that meet your requirements?
That's my knowledge, right? I'm not aware of any. We search the cell phone carriers are businesses that compete with each other. So they don't, they don't share all the details about their networks, but we do our best to search available databases and see if we can, and drive the streets looking for, opportunities to co-locate. And honestly, co-location is usually a better thing for us. It's easier to get permits. There's a lot of things that make it easier. So it's not something we shy away from necessarily.
Okay, so, and sorry, let me ask you another one then. The existing tower, that's yours, right?
The existing,
The one that next door to it, right next to it. That's also, you control that one.
that's not the case. No, it's controlled by the city of Walnut Creek, the police department. The
Okay.
tower is on
Well,
East Bay Mud property.
So, I mean, I've got to believe that all the other carriers have towers that service this area. So there must be towers for AT&T, all the other cell carriers, right? I mean, there has to be.
There are some, well, every carrier's network is a little bit different. So the fact that there may be other carriers' towers kind of in this general area doesn't necessarily mean that they would work. Some of them that were identified in the alternatives analysis make clear that AT&T and T-Mobile are there, for example. I think the one on Kim Road makes note of that. That's quite a bit farther north than this, and it would not cover the south western part of the coverage gap nearly as well. But there are other towers that, that were identified in the alternatives analysis that just don't really work well for Verizon's coverage gap. At least that one.
Okay.
I think the one way up on the hill may have some antennas there.
All right. Thanks. I appreciate your answering those.
Sure.
Jonathan,
Chair.
yeah, go ahead.
Oh, thank you. I just wanted to follow up on Commissioner LeBon's question about the stealth facilities. Our code requires stealth facilities for historic landmarks, religious facilities, educational facilities, and then commercial office and retail zoning districts, but does not require them for residential zoning districts. And the applicant is correct that stealth facilities disguised as natural features is prohibited.
Is what?
That stealth features disguising the pole as a natural feature is prohibited.
Okay, so just let me ask on that then. Would the city be opposed to a stealth feature here if everybody thought that was a better idea? It sounded, I couldn't tell if they were not allowed to or not required to.
Well, in every carrier's network is a natural feature is prohibited.
Is what?
That stealth features disguising the pole as a natural feature is prohibited. Okay, so just let me ask on that then. Would the city be opposed to a stealth feature here if everybody thought that was a better idea? It sounded, I couldn't tell if they were not allowed to or not required to. The code states that disguising as a natural feature is prohibitive. However, we have an inquiry into the city attorney's office to see if an exception to that prohibition can be granted by the Planning Commission. We're waiting on response from that team.
Oh, Mr. McArdle?
I could just chime in a bit. The city attorney's office had a chance to discuss it prior to the meeting. So there is, as you noted, an exception process through which the Planning Commission is the hearing authority to issue exceptions to the development standards, as is on the docket for installing another monopole on the same property. It's a bit tricky because the code says that the applicant may request it at the time of the application, but it doesn't explicitly say that they have to request it at the time of the application. So I suppose if that was something that was really important to the commission, they could just, I guess, see if Verizon, I mean, they've expressed a willingness to do that. So if they wanted to request that exception for a faux pine as a concealment measure, then I feel they could certainly do it at this point. The code doesn't explicitly say that they're required to do it right when they apply. It just says they may do it when they apply. So the wording is a bit unclear, but it can be read to kind of say they potentially they could do it now. And obviously it does explicitly say that the Planning Commission is the hearing authority for exception requests if the facility is not in the public right of way, which this is not.
Thank you. Commissioner Heising, were you raising your hand?
Yes, I was. Thank you, Chair. So this is a couple questions for the applicant. What drove the design of the new pole to be 60 feet? Was it where I'm going here is, if we can't force the city of Walnut Creek to co-locate on the new pole you're proposing, is that what drove? Were you building the pole so that it could move over in the future?
It was a combination of a couple of things. One is the sort of balancing act that I mentioned earlier about making the antennas high enough to clear the trees and provide coverage for the neighborhood. The other part was we're attempting to match the height of the adjacent pole so that the city of Walnut Creek could add their radio antennas at the very top, and it would be essentially the same. So we were trying to, in particular, to not exceed the height, and also to provide Verizon and the city with basically the same coverage they have now if they move their antennas to this new tower.
So if there's no leverage to get them to move, they're not going to move because there's going to be a cost to that. So I guess my revised question is, could your tower be shorter if we just assume that the city's not going to join on your pole?
A couple of comments on that. What I can tell you is East Bay Mud is they're open to having the city's radio antennas move over to the new tower, and they've expressed a willingness to work with the city of Walnut Creek to make that happen. Because I think they have just an arm's length contractual arrangement. I think that they have the power to make that happen, and we're trying to work with them to make it happen. So I don't think, I have an optimistic attitude that it will happen. Beyond that, the concern I would have with lowering the tower is that it's just going to, the lower it goes, the greater the impact on coverage. And I don't have an analysis that tells you, 5 feet lower is going to impact coverage by this percentage, because it's just more technical detail than we have considered up to this point. But I can tell you that there will be impacts the lower it goes. And so at some point, it will not be a viable solution for covering the coverage gap in the neighborhood.
Okay, thank you for that. And then I had one other question. In the staff report, it says the above ground electrical lines cannot, basically was saying they can't be undergrounded because they may conflict with existing East Bay Mud underground facilities. And I guess I don't buy that, because I know from projects I've worked on, there are multiple utilities that have underground utilities, and you just design around it. So are the wires not being underground because of cost?
No, actually, I mean, we frequently underground it. In fact, that's our preference. And our design actually shows a lot of undergrounding going up the access road. But this is a reservoir for East Bay Mud. There are big water pipes that come from the reservoir to the pumping plant, which is the shack that's shown on the drawings that is adjacent to it. And then from that pumping plant down the hill. And it's that piece, especially from the pumping plant shack out to the access road, that's the only piece that we can't really interfere with. So our above ground wires really just go over that little piece. Once we're past the pumping plant, our zoning drawings show a couple of little underground vaults that let us go back underground and go across the parking lot over to the equipment space. There are already utility poles going up the access road. We're not proposing to use those. We're proposing to underground that portion of it. And it's just that little piece, kind of close to the gate, just inside the East Bay Mud property, over to just the spot beyond the pumping plant that's important to do overhead. And it was really just those technical reasons for that design choice.
Okay, is there, just for clarity, is there a way to show it? Can you describe this on a plan view? And maybe Jonathan can pull up the plan view, and maybe you could just talk about it so I can understand where the, I just want to make sure the undergrounding and the visual impacts are minimized as much as possible, and understand the logic of where you said the poles couldn't be undergrounded.
Sure, I would say probably the A1 page is the when in fact that's the one that's brought up.
Okay.
So you can see there's a little shaded area just to the west of, that's right, exactly there. That's where the pumping plant is. There's undergrounded East Bay Mud pipes that go from the water tank to the little pumping plant shack. Now you can see there's a little darker shaded area in the upper left of that. That's where we have our vaults that would go underground. And if you follow what we call, it's called out as FIB/P, which stands for fiber/power. But to the south, that's the area where the pumping plant pipes go out underground. So instead, we're showing from that spot where those little underground vaults are, down to a proposed utility pole, right where the hand is. Yeah, that's the only portion that we're proposing to run overhead. And,
Okay.
and it's in particular just to avoid those conflicts with the underground pipes. Otherwise, we're showing the whole thing as underground, and that's actually the way we prefer it.
Okay, thank you for that. And Chair, that's my only two questions. Thank you.
Commissioner Radnich.
Thank you. Just to kind of piggyback another question on Commissioner Heising for the applicant. So I understand, or if I heard correctly, the 60-foot proposed height is based off of the existing Walnut Creek Police Department height of their receivers, correct?
That's right.
Okay, so I have a hard time understanding or believing that Verizon didn't do any sort of feasibility study to look at, for example, 55 feet height tower, a 65-foot high tower. I understand that you might not know the percentage, the increment of decreased coverage as you reduce height, but there had to have been something done to for Verizon to feel good about the proposed 60 feet. So can you just speak to that a little bit more?
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify one factor about the city's tower. One thing that was important for us is not impacting their service if they move their antennas to a new tower. So that's one reason why we wanted to preserve height, so that if they move their antennas, they could get the same height that they have now, because height does impact their service. So that was a part of it. But it certainly is true that when we design a site, the Verizon RF engineers do an analysis to make sure that that height covers what they need to. And that's what's shown in some of the coverage maps that were included, I think, in your packet, how well the signal propagates. But we don't necessarily analyze in the same way, other lower heights. I mean, it's just not one of the normal things that we do.
Okay, thank you. And then a follow-up question to that, is this layout, is this the only option for a layout? So for example, right now, if you look, all of the receivers are all more or less, I'll just call it a straight line. I know they're not in a straight line, but when you look at an image, it appears that way. Is there a way to kind of put them on top of each other and closer into the actual monopole itself, basically to make it more or less appear as wider consistently throughout, rather than kind of a stick with a set of receivers at the top? Does that make sense?
Yeah, there are some sorts of configurations like that that can work. Generally, if you have like a slimline design, what you have to do in order to make all the antennas fit is bring them quite low. So like the lowest set of antennas would probably need to be at least 20 feet lower than the others, because there is some vertical interference that they can cause with each other. But those designs happen sometimes. They work best in sort of suburban or urban areas where the lower antennas still have an opportunity to send their signal out freely. In this case, I think that the lower antennas would be more likely to be obstructed by the trees. So, I mean, there are trade-offs like that. You can bring some of the antennas lower, with the trade-off being they don't work as well.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for the applicant? Okay, I had a question. So talking about in the future, the police department moving their antennas to this proposed tower and the design that we're seeing for the proposed tower, do you have what would their antennas look like if they were moved? Would they be additional panels in that top section? Is there space to add additional antennas there?
Well, my presumption is that they would be exactly the same as they are now. So I think they have a little microwave dish, and I think they have one panel antenna. Our intention had been that those same antennas would move over. Because that hasn't been arranged with them, I can't say for sure that they wouldn't like take the opportunity to re-engineer the way their radio system works or something like that. But that was our plan, is just to have it be exactly the way it is now and move it to a new location.
So it's just this little spire at the top?
Yeah, there's a little spire that has a microwave dish on it. And then there's at least the last I looked at it, there also was a smaller antenna that looked like a panel antenna below that.
Okay.
I think the elevations show generally what that looks like on the drawing.
Yeah, I'm looking at sheet A6, I guess. Okay, I think that's all I had. Thank you for answering all of our questions for your presentation. So at this time, are there any public comments?
Yes, we do have several. And these are public comments that received from the start of the meeting, and we'll take them until the close of public comment for this item. So the first is from, and I'll read it here. This is from Michael Adler. For the past almost 2 decades, I have lived next to the Gable Lane parcel where Verizon wants to erect their 60-foot tower, their cabinet buildings, their fuel tank, and their 30 km diesel generator. I don't see this as a benefit to our wonderful community. I can't believe people are going to flock to Lafayette because of the improved self-service. Yet I can foresee potential buyers taking a look at the Verizon complex and fleeing Release Valley. Whatever is approved by the commission is precedent, and thus whatever is approved by the commission is not only possible on the Gable Lane parcel, but should be appropriate for every residential neighborhood. Are we willing to erect one of these towers in your neighborhood, maybe 10 other neighborhoods, maybe every neighborhood in the city? I say it should be 0 neighborhoods. Besides being a blotch to our natural surroundings, these towers are unhealthy. Technology has moved so quickly that it is basically impossible to do long-term studies to research long-term effects upon people who live close to these towers. All long-term research has been done on cell transmissions that involve a lot less traffic. Yet because there aren't any long-term studies about health risks, should that be a reason to assume that there aren't any health risks? Is it okay to assume? In the past, we were told that the old cell tower activity was safe, but now we know that not to be true. There are long-term studies that have looked at residences in neighborhoods next to cell towers, and guess what? Is anyone saying that having cell towers next to people are beneficial? Do we think about having children living next to cell towers makes them develop better and allows them to become stronger and more intelligent? Does anyone really think that wildlife living next to cell towers thrive? I don't want to burst anyone's bubble, but the long-term studies do not support there being any benefit for anything living next to a cell tower. On the other hand, these studies show that cell towers harm insects, animals, children, adults, and pregnant mothers. Yet originally the cell companies said they weren't a risk. Please don't let me and my family be the guinea pigs. Please don't put a dangerous splat on our tranquil neighborhood by allowing the Verizon complex to be placed within hundreds of yards from our house and our family. This should not be okay. This is not how we should show that we, quote, love Lafayette, end quote. We, the residents of the city, are Lafayette. If these big business outsiders win the approval, then it is big business first and the residents last. If Verizon is allowed to erect these structures next to my house, then other companies will want the same opportunity. Please don't allow this to move forward. Your opposition to the request will be setting precedent. I don't want these structures living next to me. Do you want them living next to you? Please just say no. And then I will continue reading this follow-up from Michael Adler for the next minute. I'm going to set my timer here. My family and I live very close to the proposed site of Verizon complex. I'm very fearful of the consequences if the proposal is given the go-ahead. What % of the Lafayette population will benefit from the construction of the tower? The only residents who will benefit are those who are long-term Verizon customers, but will the average person really want to move to Lafayette because Verizon has 5G? Yet by giving the go-ahead to Verizon, the Planning Commission will also be creating a precedent that they favor business over the well-being of us Lafayette residents. The construction of the tower cannot improve the real estate value of our property, it can only lower it. If the city is collecting funds from Verizon for this project over the long term, will that be greater than the loss when Release Valley real estate is sold for lower prices due to the view and proximity of the cell tower? There is a tower currently on the parcel, and this is a daily eyesore to me. The construction of a larger tower with more bells and whistles, along with subsequent side orders of cabinets, a fuel tank, and a 30 km generator, and that goes over the 3-minute marker for each resident. So we'll move on to the next one. And this is a comment letter from Mike Geringer. My family residence of 25 years is 400 feet west of the proposed monopole and array across Release Valley Road and just below the site. I have a 180-degree view of Mount Diablo, including the entirety of the Class 2 protected ridgeline extending south from Brookwood Reservoir. Hillside Development Ordinance 6-2071 requires findings that, quote, structures in the Hillside Overlay District will, to the extent feasible, be located away from prominent locations such as ridgelines, hilltops, knolls, and open slopes, and not unduly impact, restrict, or block significant views, end quote. From the west, the initial 9 antenna array blocks 100 square foot of Class 2 ridgeline. The array blocks 100 square foot of Class 2 ridgeline. It's a billboard 10 times larger than the existing dish. LR5 zoning and discouraged site designation protect the Class 2 ridgeline. Surely it is reasonable to expect that a $237 billion corporation such as Verizon building in a residential zone would be held to as stringent as a standard as a homeowner. The negative impact to my property value will be extreme, upwards of $1 million. Prospective buyers will never see the view or the beautiful protected ridgeline, only the giant cell tower beaming directly at their family 7x24. In talking with a leading Lafayette realtor, neighborhood cell towers consistently depress values by at least 10%, and in practice eliminate 90% of the young family buyers that favor Lafayette. Views routinely add or subtract 50,000 in a uniform residential appraisal report. Per land use ordinance requirement 6-215 subsection A3, quote, will not adversely affect preservation of property values, end quote. The variance must be denied. Raptor activity at antenna height is significant. The CEQA section 151305 categorical exemption referenced in the staff report pertains to minor changes and should not be applied to a major wireless facilities permit. My May 1st comments evidence an ERR is required to confirm impacts to nesting and rare animals. Profit is driving Verizon. Their site review falls way short of evidencing finding 6-151B subsection VI that the tabletop alternative, an existing antenna farm that would not destroy property values, would conflict with other facilities with additional engineering. By ordinance, the burden of proof is on the applicant. Verizon seeks this location not primarily to serve the 1,580 customers, but for, quote, in-building service to complete with AT&T and Comcast landlines. Further, in all likelihood, Verizon intends to sublet antennas on the new tower. And that's the end of the 3-minute mark. Let's see. And we will move to the last public comments from Michael Comic. Michael states, Commissioner Labange got to the point that there must be locations that have been approved for other carrier cell towers. I believe the Planning Commission should push Verizon to pursue one of those sites. It sounds like they are reluctant to follow through with that. Please ask them to pursue one of those sites. It will work, and even if not as well, it will allow the city of Lafayette to give Verizon another option. In addition, they have no agreement with, nor does it sound like they've talked with the city of Walnut Creek. The wave activity is going to be a lot greater on the cell tower than the Walnut Creek's tower. Please don't jeopardize our health, and please don't add all the Verizon facilities so we have their pole and the pole that's already there. And that concludes the public comment that we received so far.
Okay, thank you. Now the applicant has time to make a rebuttal, 5 minutes.
Thank you. I just wanted to comment briefly about property values. It surprised me, and it may surprise you to learn that good cell phone coverage has become, over the last 10 years, a very important factor for people who are buying homes. I've seen some research, not conducted by Verizon, but just reported, that indicated that for many home buyers, especially the millennial generation, good cell phone coverage is more important to them than schools. So from our experience, cell sites do not tend to depress property values. They're very much an enhancement, especially for today's modern home buyers. I'm not sure what else to address on some of the other comments. We're trying to find the best fit between visibility and performance, and we think this is a good compromise in this design. I can tell you that we have, so the existing agreement between the City of Walnut Creek and East Bay Mud is between them, and it's not between, Verizon's not involved in that agreement. And so what we've been doing is working with East Bay Mud to kind of resolve this issue of moving the antennas to the new tower, but we're not involved in that initial discussion day by day. So all I can say is we're working toward it and encouraging it to happen, but I can't forecast exactly when or how successful it will be. But it is a goal for both Verizon and for East Bay Mud.
Okay, thank you. So at this time, we'll bring it back to the commission. Oh, Mr. McArdle?
Hey, sorry. Yeah, I just wanted to clarify in light of the presentation from Verizon representative. I just wanted to clarify one of my earlier points when we were talking about whether there'd be a way to, excuse me, condition the approval on getting the police to move. I think the issue is based on that presentation and his response is now kind of shifted more to that Verizon needs to flesh out their alternatives analysis more. It sounds like the height isn't they haven't confirmed whether this 60-foot height is needed to fill their gap. They've just done it based on the kind of hope that the police department will move. And while that may very well help the police department, as you noted, there's no guarantee that they will move. And Verizon's not a party to that agreement. So given that, if they don't move, apparently based on Verizon's prior alternatives assessment, they didn't consider a lower tower height, and there's a potential that it could still fill the gap. And I would imagine that a less intrusive alternative would be something that is not 60 feet tall. So if they can still fill the gap with something that is less intrusive, then they should flush that out as part of their alternatives analysis, rather than requesting this exception for the height. Another point, I guess, as part of their assessment is they're requesting to put two poles on the same property, but I think again, they wouldn't need an exception if they were able to just replace the existing pole or tower. And I don't know that they considered that as part of their alternatives analysis either. So I just wanted to kind of clarify or build off my earlier point. That's it.
Thank you. Okay. So I just wanted to give a quick reminder for the commission and for the public of what we're tasked with here tonight. We're reviewing the proposed project against the findings required for a wireless communication facility permit, as well as the findings pertaining to a hillside development permit. This includes evaluating the specifics spread up in the staff report, namely the exceptions to the development standards for WCFs, the proposed tower being located on a discouraged site, the proposal being for a second monopole on the parcel, the height, and whether offsite visibility is adequately addressed by the proposal, along with the conditions of approval, which include the planting of additional vegetation. And then I also wanted to reiterate that the application cannot be judged on general safety of electromagnetic radiation, because only whether the facility will comply with FCC regulations. So that being said, who wants to go first? If you can talk about whether you are having difficulty making any of the findings, any comments on specific items highlighted by staff, conditions of approval, the other options that we started to discuss through our questioning process. Commissioner Maggio?
Thank you, Chair. Well, there's a long history with cell towers in Lafayette. And I think one of the reasons in the code we no longer have the stealth towers is we had to endure quite a few unattractive towers dressed up as blue Christmas trees. And I, for one, led the charge against stealth towers in lieu of something painted gray that really tends to disappear more in the skyline. So I'm happy to have a sidebar conversation with why we ended up where we did with that current code. With that said, it is a discouraged site. And when we approved this application in 2012, it was for one pole. This would be 2 poles. I have a concern that even if the police in Walnut Creek did move to the new pole, abandoning old equipment and facilities has always been very difficult for us to monitor unless it's in conditions of approval. We've seen lots of generations of components and equipment left on poles while new updated equipment was added. That's another reason why I would not be in favor of any pre-approvals of future projects, because we wouldn't have any ability to monitor what is happening and require removal of old equipment in our conditions. So with that said, I'm having difficulty making several findings, finding H for communications facilities with the second pole. Another thing we don't want is receptor farms, and we've got a few in Lafayette where the income is pretty good, and we've got hills covered with receptor towers, and this neighborhood would not be an appropriate site for that. The other findings I'm having difficulty making are the Hillside findings C and D1 because of visibility. Second pole and visibility are my 2 concerns. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Maggio. Commissioner Mason?
I also am not a fan of the stealth towers. They just tend to look bad. Given the topography out there, I can't imagine having some, it's probably going to end up being a tall tower. And I'd rather have probably 2 towers at the same location than 2 towers on different places in the valley and more people complaining about them. It's definitely is a coverage gap there. I lost a call just yesterday when I was driving out to one of the funeral homes out there. And yeah, that is a concern. I live on the lower half of Sunset Loop, and when I first moved in, the only way I could get cell phone coverage is if I stood on my bed in the master bedroom on the 2nd floor. And because I'm tall, I could get it. My wife couldn't. So yes, I do think getting coverage there is needed. If that is the best possible way to get the coverage, then I would support that.
Okay. Commissioner Heising?
Yeah, thank you. So I just wanted to quickly go through the 3 comments. I was taking notes. So the first commenter regarding radio frequency health, and I think Chair, you did a good job, and that's partly why I asked the question at the beginning of this item, that we really don't have much purview if the applicant or any applicant puts forth a study that shows that they're below the FCC threshold amounts. And I mean, we're not here to debate whether the studies are correct or not, or if the threshold amount with the FCC is appropriate or not, and health of people living near the towers. So that's my comment on the first commenter. And then the second one, the comments were that it appeared, from what I understand, that the speaker, or the writer rather, in this case, was across the valley, across on the other side of Release Valley Road, up at a higher elevation or equal to, and they had a 180 degree view of Mount Diablo. So I'm trying to envision that in my mind. If you could see the whole ridge and Mount Diablo, and then you see one stick, yeah, you can see it, but in my mind, it doesn't block your view. So that's my interpretation. But then the same commenter also brought up bird nesting. So I guess I would ask staff, I know this has gone through the CEQA process, but and I don't recall, is there a condition? I think there's some trees being removed on this site. So that's where nesting season would come into play with removal of trees. So if we get to the point of perhaps approving this item, I would just want to confirm that there's a condition in there that that addresses the bird nesting season. And then on the third comment, it was regarding the other sites. And I thought the matrix in the staff report was pretty clear. It addressed each of the other sites. And then in the far right column, there's a summary of applicant analysis. And it talked about at each of those locations why this one was the preferred option versus the other locations. And most of it had to do with coverage. The last one was even that it would have been highly visible site. So, I mean, if we're having this kind of conversation on this site, which I drove on Release Valley Road, and when you drive northbound, you can't even see the existing pole or the tank. When you drive southbound, you can see there's a time in which when you look up, you can see through some gaps in trees. There's a lot of trees in the area. You can see the pole from Release Valley Road, and that's the road itself is the visibility, the visibility that we're to take our perspective from, not a ridge on the other side of Release Valley Road. So I think those are just my comments on the three comments that were read into the record. And then I guess I'll leave my comments and discussion at that. If we do get to a place of recommending this, I have a couple other condition of approval recommendations. But I'll keep that for later. Thank you.
Commissioner Heising, what are your thoughts on the two towers versus one tower? Although that's not a proposal, but do you have difficulty with?
Yeah, well, obviously I would prefer one tower. I guess I was hoping for a little more effort to try to get, or at least a discussion with the city of Walnut Creek to see if they would even want to come over to the other tower. I wasn't clear if there was any outreach in that regard. And then, I mean, one thought is, do we even know that tower is in use? I haven't heard that. It wasn't in the staff report, and I hadn't heard it in a comment during this discussion. I mean, is that an old tower that was put there 30 years ago, and that equipment, I mean, maybe the police dispatch is using another tower and they're not even using that tower anymore. So that kind of jumped into my mind as well. So yes, Chair, to answer your question, definitely prefer one tower instead of two.
And I forgot who brought it up, but somebody was suggesting, it might have been Mr. McArdle, that if the equipment wasn't going to be moved over, then the proposed tower could get shorter. But then
Could
that
possibly.
seems to preclude the possibility for the equipment being moved over and consolidating one to one tower.
Yeah, I guess it'd be nice to hear that no way, no how is the city of Walnut Creek Police Department going to move over? Or yes, they might. If it's the former, then let's explore how possibly the tower could be shorter. Because why build a proposed second tower at 60 feet if it's not going to happen that the police are going to move over? So I guess that would be something that I'd like to see figured out, and maybe we can decide and can come back to us when we have a little more information. And then in the meantime, that maybe the applicant can look at 55 feet and 50 feet, just so that it can answer those questions. Do those lower elevations work in, say, 5-foot increments? And of course, probably if you get too low, like the applicant mentioned, it's not gonna give you the coverage you're looking for.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Radnich?
Yeah, I agree. I think we need more information in the feasibility study to look at less intrusive alternatives on this site. Personally, I think they should be looking at alternatives for this site regarding height, in addition to additional communication or actual communication with City of Walnut Creek, because the 2 poles is different than one that was previously approved in 2013 or 2012, 2013. Given the fact that it is a discouraged site, I think it would, I don't think it's unreasonable to request additional information.
Thank you. Commissioner Farsan?
Thank you. I mean, I'm probably just going to be repeating what everybody said. I think my 2 issues are height and visibility. I think the 60 feet was put out there because some engineers thought that could get them the coverage that was necessary, but they didn't do further analysis. So that's one. And I'll point out the simulation that Jonathan sent around later that showed the picture from the ridgeline. I mean, I agree with Commissioner Heising in terms of what we're supposed to be looking at, but that location, that sticks out like a sore thumb, to say the least. So I think if you lower it, then it can get somewhat within the tree line. What I don't know is how much above that tree line it is in terms of 60 versus 50. So those are my overarching issues. And I think there's more information that Verizon can give us, and we can make a more informed decision. I will say this, I agree it would be great to have 1 tower versus 2, but if you're gonna have 2, I'd rather have them at the same location, so it's done and out of the way. And so we can try to hide them as best as possible. But those are my overall comments. I just think the height is too much there, where it sits.
Thanks. Jonathan, since Commissioner Farzan just referenced the simulation that you sent, I have it pulled up. And have you overlaid something, or is that just looking at the existing tower?
That is overlaying what we believe to be a good illustration of the proposed tower in the existing context.
So the sort of satellite dish feature, that's the existing tower showing up behind the proposed tower?
The one on the picture to the right would be the existing tower.
Excuse me, Chair. Could we show the simulation on the screen so the public can see it?
Yeah, I can pull that up.
Oh, you know what? I think maybe mine didn't come through correctly. I got a PDF that shows your model of the proposed tower on a separate sheet. That's why.
Okay, just one moment. Yes, so to the chair's question, this right here would be the simulation of the proposed tower, and then behind it and to the right would be the existing tower operated by Walnut Creek.
Why do they look so far apart? How far apart are they in plan?
I'll pull that up also.
I think they're.
Using the scale at the bottom, it looks to be around 30 feet between the existing tower here and the proposed tower here. That's just my rough estimate.
And then could you point out in plan where you were proposing the oak tree?
Yes, the oak tree would be located north of the facility in this general area here.
And so can you remind me what's the maximum height of that oak tree likely to be?
I don't know off the top of my head. Maybe Greg may have a better estimate than I for a mature coast live oak.
Under good to ideal growing conditions, it could get to 70 feet.
Okay, all right, thank you. Commissioner LeBon, did you have any comments?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just one point of more, or just thing for Jonathan. I'm not sure why, but that exhibit, when I view it, I'm glad you put it up on your screen, because it might be, I wasn't able to see what you added. It actually just didn't show up in mine. So just a thought, maybe PDF it next time. I think because I'm on an Apple and a Word doc, sometimes there's some compatibility. I also think I did go over to that property to the east. I think they're actually more in line, but this structure is so much wider. That was very helpful that you put that together. It was actually a lot bigger than I actually had imagined it. So moving on, some of the things I'm having a little issue. I'm looking at on the conditions of approval number 16, encourage co-location. And this basically is saying, if in the future somebody needs this tower, that, this applicant, and I don't know how strong this is in reality, other than encourage. That's not a real strong legal term, I don't think. But it makes me wonder on the alternative sites earlier that we talked about, if those applications and conditions of approval had also stated to those people to encourage co-location. And if so, I would really like to know where those are and were they truly evaluated. I know the applicant mentioned that, they didn't have the coverage, and that might be the case, but it's hard to know that without, it being affirmatively stated by the applicant. Again, I'm still suspect of these 5 alternative sites. Those sound like maybe they're all East Bay mud sites. And I don't mean that in a disingenuous way to the applicant. I just want to make sure that we're doing our due diligence. So I would be very supportive of more information. The 2 polls, what I'm really trying to say is, could this poll be somewhere else? And if we were to go ask the applicant to come back with more information, which I'm more and more inclined to do, I would really want them to come back with some information about Walnut Creek and the police department and what alternatives are there, because I think a solution that's already figured out now that affects how many towers and where would be encouraged or appreciated, I know by myself. That's all I have, Chair. Thank you.
Commissioner Radnich, thank you. Commissioner Launch.
Yeah, one other thing I did want to mention, I know the city did the best they could with, putting together this visual sim right now. But what I do feel is, maybe something when the applicant is, if we are going to request applicant look into, just kind of fleshing out the study a little more, the feasibility of it. In addition to the height, I would be interested in seeing actual visual sims of it, as well as, in my opinion, so I'm looking off of my other screen here, but if you look at just in the visual sim that the city prepared quickly, the existing tower is a little more tucked within the existing vegetation. I did drive out to the site. I got out at the top there, walked around as far as I could to the locked gates, as well as visited the neighbors, well, not the neighbor, but the property, Mr. Geringer's property, to look at the different views. And it just appears from my kind of view of it that if the proposed tower were located where the existing tower is, it's kind of more tucked into the trees. I understand why this parcel in particular is being proposed as, the ideal alternative parcel, but I think they can do a better job of looking at alternatives, including visual simulations.
Okay, thank you. I'll ask staff, do we have any timelines pertaining to this application? Are we able to ask them to come back with some of the information we've been talking about?
Yes, we do. We have a tolling agreement between the city and the applicant for this, requiring the city to take action, final action on the application by June 21st. And it appears that we do have at least 2 meetings between now and then, if the commission wants to continue.
Okay, thank you. So my comments are in line with what others have said. And I'll just add that in terms, the thing that probably bothered me the most was, or the 2 things were that it's on a discouraged site and that it's a second pole. And I don't want us to get to a point where the section of the code that mentions discouraged sites sort of becomes unimportant because we're always, making an exception. Although I do appreciate that this is a site that's previously developed with a wireless communication facility. So I think in the grand scheme of things, that makes it preferable if you have to be on a discouraged site. So I think in terms of coming back with additional information, I'd like to see how the tower here could be made less intrusive. And I really would like to ask the applicant to sort of push the initiative to try to get the 2 towers consolidated. And I appreciate Commissioner Radnich's comment about, from many perspectives, having the proposed tower located where the existing tower is will tuck it more into the vegetation and make it less visible. And if it's a choice between 2 towers and the existing tower and a shorter tower, I think I'd prefer that they be combined. And I was also wondering, I should have asked this earlier, but whether the design could be modified. And I don't know the different, options for cell phone antenna design. And I understand that the service being provided by the proposed tower is obviously different than what's there now. But the existing tower is much less visible than the tower that's proposed with all of these panel antennas. So I don't know if there's a way to, make it look different, less like it does. I think that's all. So I think what I'm hearing is we'd like some more information about the alternative sites that were listed. We'd like the applicant to take some steps to communicate with the Walnut Creek Police Department to see, you know, what they're really willing to do in terms of consolidating the towers or not. Sounds like we wanted, in the alternative analysis, looking at placing the proposed tower where the existing tower is, and then also look at whether the height can be brought down. Am I missing anything? Okay.
That's what I captured as well.
Okay. And I guess ideally this would be, maybe we'd like it to be brought back. So our next meeting is full, but the following meeting, so that would give them about a month. So we're not leaving it to the last minute.
Yeah, I recommend that as well. I think the first meeting in June is June 1st. And then if necessary, that would still leave the following meeting, June 15th, within the tolling agreement.
Okay. Oh, and then lastly, I guess if the applicant can do some of these simulations, if I don't know if that's a part of your typical package, but that would be helpful rather than, you know, staff doing it. Okay. Greg?
And I see Commissioner Mason with his hand up as well. I just wanted to speak to the June 1st Planning Commission meeting. The deadline for submission typically for an applicant to meet that meeting would be 2 prior to, so that staff has about a week, and then we publish the staff report the week before. So just wanted to acknowledge the lead times associated with the one continuance for a month. It's only about 2.5 weeks at the most.
So Commissioner Mason?
I think the reaching out to the city of Walnut Creek is nice, but Commissioner LeBon, this is more your area of expertise. The possibility of getting an ironclad agreement in 2.5 weeks between Verizon, East Bay Mud, and Walnut Creek is nil. You know, at best we can get some hope for verbiage, and so I'm not sure I really want to put that in there other than some wishy-washy statement saying here, you know, see if you can get some way, which way they're leaning. But if you could comment on that.
No, that's a good point. I also don't want to do the reverse of that, which is allow applications to be up against a deadline, and therefore we have to do stuff because somebody didn't think to reach out before. So I still think we should at least, if the applicant is going to go and come back, at a minimum, they should check with the Walnut Creek Police Department and come back and tell us, you know, what's in their mind. It might give us some purview for the future. But yeah, I don't know if they'll be able to get anything a concrete decision.
Well, I'll go ahead. I'll ask the applicant, Mr. Haddock, do you think, given the timeline that Greg described, that you'd be able to get us most of the information that we're looking for?
In the context of information from the city of Walnut Creek in particular?
Well, that and the additional investigating and calculating that we're asking you to do.
Yeah, I think we could get close to that, certainly. I just wanted to comment on the location of the existing tower, since it was brought up a couple of times. My understanding is that existing tower falls within the 50-foot setback requirement from the property line. So that would be an obstacle for us locating a new tower unless the city was willing to let us use that same location despite the setback problem. But I think I could get a lot of the information, probably all of it that you're seeking.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. Okay, if there are no further comments, then we can move on to our, Mr. Haddock, did you have a
I'm sorry, I just wanted to add one other thing. We did submit some photo simulations from views from locations that were publicly accessible along the road. The challenge for us submitting other views is that we don't presume to go on to other private properties in order to take photos from there. So that's where we get limited on where we can take pictures from. But you know, I can work with staff on locations that they recommend we shoot that from. That could be a little bit of a time limitation because our photo sim artist needs to go out and take pictures and then process those. And sometimes that can take longer than 2.5 weeks, for example. But we'll do our best to comply with that.
Okay, thank you. And if you can, you know, handle all the public locations, then maybe, I mean, typically when we're reviewing projects, we look at the views from public locations and not necessarily every view from a private residence. But then Jonathan, when you start getting comments in from residents, if they have not included a picture from their property, then you could request that they do so we can have that information as well. Okay. All right. Thank you, everyone. Oh, Commissioner Radnich.
Sorry. Since the 50-foot setback was mentioned, and I'm trying to look it up right now on figure, I think this is A1. Can that be added to the figure set, the 50-foot setback?
Sure. So Mr. Haddock, if you could include that in the plans for your next submittal, that would be appreciated.
Because right there, it looks like it's 55 feet. Right from the property line, the existing pole. Oh no, I see it. It's right within, probably right at 50 or so. Okay, thank you.
Okay. All right. So thank you, everyone. We'll close this item. Oh, Jonathan.
We have a motion to continue. If
You need a
that's
motion?
intended.
Sorry, we can't hear you very well again.
Yes, I would. Staff would like a motion to continue to.
Okay, sure.
June
Commissioner Maggio.
Yes, I'd like to make a motion that we continue this application to a date certain and allow the applicant to come back with the information previously addressed.
Second.
Second by Commissioner Heising.
And the date being June 1st.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, motion carries unanimously.
Thank you, Mr. Haddock. Thank you, Mr. McCardle.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Good night.
Okay, so we are moving on to item 7B. Land use permit L02-20 and design review permit 03-20. What's SSK2? Is that the owner? Retail business zoning.
That is the owner. All right.
And we're ready for a staff report.
All right. Next item is land use permit 02-20 and also design review DR 03-20. The applicant is SSK2 LLC, and the proposed use, proposed business is called Thomas Properties. So L02-20 is a land use permit that requests a land use permit to request a conditional use of administrative office at 3547 Wilkinson Lane, and also design review for the construction of around 300 square feet in additions and overall exterior modifications to one of the existing buildings on site. So the scope of work again includes a new proposed use. The site currently has 2 buildings at 3547 that are attached in an L shape, and they're currently both vacant. The previous use was used by Futures Explored, which was offered educational services and development training for adults with disabilities. And the proposed use for Thomas Properties would be the administrative offices for a real estate management and development firm. In terms of neighborhood context, the site is located just off the private Wilkinson Lane, south of Lafayette Square, and the adjacent properties, the adjacent uses is a mixture of uses, and that includes a church, a restaurant, a tax office, a private residence, and multifamily housing as well. The property is also a creekside property with the creek running along the rear property line. The retail business district requires a land use permit to consider administrative office for any building, for any use at the ground floor of a building. So this building is one story and it's existing, but because of this provision in the RB district, a land use permit is required. And the intent behind that is to retain retail and preserve the pedestrian feel of our retail business district in downtown Lafayette. Interestingly, the downtown specific plan categorizes this property and the surrounding area as the downtown retail district, and it envisions administrative office to be permitted by right for any floor in a building not fronting Mount Diablo. So this is not fronting Mount Diablo. So the downtown specific plan envisions this use to be allowed by right. But the zoning district hasn't been updated and revised to reflect the downtown specific plan. So that's why we're here today to consider the land use permit, because it's still required. So the land use permit findings, which many of you are familiar with, we have a standard set, but then also the Planning Commission must find several specific land use permit findings related to administrative office on the ground floor. That's also been included in the draft resolution. And those findings, again, relate to preserving retail, protecting the neighborhood feel of the area, and preserving frontages for pedestrian walkways. Along with the land use permit findings, the Planning Commission must also make design review findings for an addition to an existing building in downtown, as well as overall exterior modifications to a building in downtown. Staff can make the required findings for a land use permit, and those are found in the draft resolution. As relates specifically to the RB district, staff finds that it's an appropriate use because the previous use was not a retail district. I'm sorry, a retail use. It was an educational service. So by going from an educational service to administrative office, downtown is not losing a retail component. And then also because the project doesn't propose major site planning issues, it's one site planning change is a modest addition to the right elevation. The project wouldn't have an impact on any pedestrian walkways or any business frontage. So staff can make those findings. That's in the draft resolution. And also as it relates to design review, staff can make those findings as well, finding the addition to be well integrated into the existing building. Again, only one of the buildings is proposed to be modified. It's an existing around 1,500 square feet, and the addition would allow for 300 square feet of additional office space to accommodate the use. And I should also mention that again, the use is for Thomas Properties. It's a real estate management office. It's expected to have 6 to 8 employees and operate normal business hours. So based on that, and it's used as generally an office, staff finds that it's compatible with the surrounding area, and it's not expected to have any any impacts related to noise, odor, circulation, view impacts, privacy impacts, or any of those. So with that, staff recommends that the Planning Commission adopt Resolution 2020-13, approving the project subject to conditions. Here for any questions.
Sorry, okay. Thank you for the staff report. Any questions for staff? Commissioner Radnich?
Yeah, I have a question just regarding the parking requirement for the project. So I'm reading on page 3 of 4 of the staff report. And so it sounds like the parking requirement based off the square footage at roughly 1,800 square feet would be 6 parking spaces with 18 spaces proposed. Are those spaces right now that are currently there, are those metered just like, you know, the ones throughout the rest of Lafayette Square are, or are they not metered? Are they specific just for this building?
I believe they're specific to this parcel, the 2 buildings on the parcel, but I think the applicant should chime in on that.
Good evening. This is Steve Thomas. Got to say, first time in 35 years, been doing this a long time, that I'm at a planning commission meeting on Zoom. And we have Les Mew here as well. And we've been working together probably for close to 30 years. But in any event, the parking is meant to be a private parking lot. And I think there's 17 or 18 stalls, which is pretty unique for downtown Lafayette. And will serve our purpose just fine.
Thank you. Any other questions for staff? Jonathan?
Through the chair, I'll just comment on Commissioner Radnich's question about parking. So the parking section in the staff report is a conservative calculation of parking, and that's based solely on the spaces being vacant, and we're just starting from basically a blank slate, saying that at this square footage and this parking requirement, 30.3 spaces per 1,000 gross foot area, this is the number of spaces required, 6 spaces. However, that number of spaces could possibly be less because the city has a practice of calculating parking spaces based on the difference in parking demand from the previous use to this use. The applicant hasn't demonstrated what the parking requirement was for the last use, so we were not able to calculate that difference. But upon receiving that information, and if we find that the use has, if we find that if we find that the parking demand has not increased, then we would just calculate the difference and you'd result in a lower number.
Okay, any other questions for staff? Well, I'll just, I asked staff this question prior to the meeting, but I'll just state it now for everybody else's information. So I asked why the creek setback determination wasn't completed prior to our review and thus included in the materials that we have. And staff said that that's because the creek setback exception would require city council approval. So it would be the next step after the planning commission review. Is that correct, Jonathan?
Yes, that's correct. An exception has to be granted by the city council. So in thinking about that, staff has prepared a condition of approval stating that the applicant can either they'll work with the city engineer to determine what the creek setback actually is, and they'll either relocate the building to be in compliance with it or to seek an exception.
And a follow-up question to my earlier question, why is it so difficult to figure out where that is? Is it because the like underwater topography of the creek is always changing, or why?
In my limited experience with it, it's calculated, and I believe the applicant's civil engineers here, so you can fill in, but it's calculated based on the grade between the grade between the top of bank and the building, but also I believe it's the depth of the creek itself. So each property is going, based on topography, is going to have a different creek setback.
Okay, so the analysis is just typical.
Hey, Steve Thomas here. Al Shigagi is our civil engineer. Al, are you here? I don't see Al. Well, Les, maybe you can take a shot at this one, but I believe we provided this information. But
yes, that information from the civil, there was some specific technical issues this public works engineer had with the initial drawings, and the civil resubmitted more annotated information. Part of the issue is that where you measure the creek from the center line, from the deepest section, it also is wandering behind our property. So the line isn't consistent. So there was some technical issues of where the sections were cut that the civil engineer supplied. We also supplied the certification on the floodplain level, and all that information, which our civil believes is satisfactory, has been sent to the public works engineer, and we're just waiting for comment.
Okay, and I see what, I think I'm looking at the sheet that you're referring to. So right now, you feel reasonably comfortable that the proposal is outside of the creek setback?
That's correct. Civil engineer feels fairly comfortable with what he provided.
Okay. Commissioner Heiss, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I guess I would just add that when you look at the plans, just to make a note for the record, that the proposed addition is in line with the existing plane of the rear of the building. Plus, there's a garage behind it between the building itself and the creek. So, and the garage is staying, from my understanding, in the staff report and the plans. So I guess I'd just make that comment.
All right, thank you. Any other questions of staff? Okay, so at this time, the applicant's free to make a presentation. I think you have 10 minutes.
yeah, I'll just turn it over to Les. We're happy to be coming into the community. Have been, went to Alcalanes High School, graduated in '77, live in Lafayette. Parents live in Lafayette, son lives in Lafayette. And we've been in Walnut Creek with our offices for 30 plus years, and we're looking forward to being in Lafayette.
Well, if it's possible, let me try sharing the screen here for the exhibit. And should be the drawing set. Is that what everybody's seeing here?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. The original building, as you can see from the civil drawing, there's a L-shaped building configuration that is on the property. They are actually separated buildings that were at one point in time combined together for accessibility with a series of ramps and decks, and also exterior canopies that would provide protection over these areas. So there is a connection to this rear parking lot that I believe is shared by the church. And there is a pedestrian entry that crosses through this property and leads on further into downtown. None of that is proposed to be altered. Again, this is the existing condition. This is the building that we are making modifications. This is the side yard where our 316 feet would be added. This particular building, I guess, has had several uses over the years. It's commercial with, I think they converted this rear section to 3 apartments. They all front into this court driveway area. So the back of the building is essentially service areas, very few windows that we're fronting on. And there's actually a concrete wall that's between the 2 properties along this side. One of the things to note is that this particular property is slightly lower than the subject property. So there's actually an elevation change there as well. Again, this was the information the city engineer is reviewing currently onto the setback. This is the setback that we are concerned with. This is the one that the engineer has provided supplemental information to the public works engineer. You can see where our addition is in relation to that setback line. The rear of the building is along this line. Our addition is actually just a few inches further back than that. So there's actually more clearance than the original building. Again, this side yard is already a paved area. It's kind of a utility area. The current past tenant used it to access this garage and a kind of a outbuilding here that they use for storage. And they also had a couple of wood raised planters in this area. I'm not really sure how much attention those had. We are going within this area. My understanding is that our allowed setback is actually 0 to this property line, but we wish to maintain a walkway through here to give access to the rear property and the storage area here. So we have maintained a 5-foot to 6-foot separation to the existing property line. Again, here's the addition. This is our calculated 20% open space. None of that is actually impacted in this area. This area wasn't required to be calculated for that. We are tearing down this little shed structure in this particular area. The garage does stay. These are the existing parking spaces out there. There is some slight change in this area because the existing accessible parking space is actually not code compliant. So we are making it such, and so there's a little bit of shifting around in this area. No trees are removed. The arborist report did indicate some trees that indicated which trees would require to be protected during construction. Other than that, there is actually no green area being disturbed. Again, this is the existing configuration. These storage buildings are being torn down, and this is our new addition. Our roof is actually an extension of the existing. We're using the same slope, the same ridge line. It is set back slightly from the front of the building, so it has less of an impact visually from the front as being seen as a widening of the building. It also preserves some utility connections. This portion of the building was a commercial kitchen for the past tenant, but it was for, as I understand, sending food out. And there was no retail sales of the food at here. It was just prepared here. So there's a lot of rooftop equipment, makeup air units, exhaust fan units, all those will be removed off of the roof. Again, this mechanical equipment for the condition is being removed under the new proposal. This is the existing side of the building. You can see there's some utilities in here, and there was a lot of kitchen, hot water, exterior hot water equipment. All this equipment here will be removed. The electrical will stay. That establishes where the setback of the new addition is. Because we are between 5 and 10 feet of the property line, there's a limitation of how much unprotected openings we can have. So we actually have less openings facing the property line than the original building had. From the rear of the building, there is substantially no change here. This is the addition. Again, the profiles, you see the rapid drop off down towards the creek. We are maintaining the same profile, the existing roof. The existing height elements of the roof is already there. We're not altering it. This section is going north-south. This is our new addition. This is the adjacent property, which is actually a slightly lower elevation. Our exterior exterior, Steve wanted to soften the building up a little bit. He didn't need such a monumental entry. This is a destination type of user, so they expect much fewer type of people visiting this building. And so we chose materials and textures that are more pedestrian oriented and a little lower scale. This is again kind of a background building that pushes into the tree line above the creek. So we believe it kind of softens the exterior from the plaster that was there before. Plus there were a few elements, trellis elements and such that were carried over from the existing walkways to kind of lower the impact of the entry. Previously, you'd walk up to here and this was a fairly huge element that was imposing. So we just wanted to make it a little bit more pedestrian friendly. All these walkways exist. They were part of the accessibility provisions that were put in by previous tenants. And they actually make an accessible path to that rear parking lot that you looked at. Again, the type of materials that are being used at, again, here's the shingle material, the wood trim on the new doors. This would be the plaster color around the side of the building. And again, we have some photographs of here. This was a little bit more imposing and monumental than Steve actually thought was necessary for their business. So that's in part why we reduced the scale and got rid of the monolithic exterior material to make it a little more friendly. This is a side yard where the addition will be. This is the shed there that we're going to be removing. That's the garage that'll stay in the rear. This is the property line fence, and it essentially is a utility service area. Again, here's the view of the same area looking back towards Wilkinson and some of the other things that are along the side. You can see where the adjacent building is. Portions of their building are well within 5 feet of this existing property line, but they have no windows. And this is the backyard area that will be maintained. There's no encroachment within that. It's a great amenity that Steve wants to keep for their own use. Again, this area, the outdoor area, is being maintained. Here are the walkway systems leading from the church parking lot that will pass and enter through going towards downtown Lafayette. That circulation doesn't change either. That's pretty much it. There's a second building right now that is not being under consideration. We're only making changes to this particular building. This is a little bit shot down the property line between the adjacent commercial residential building and Steve's property. The building is situated nicely. As you can see, it kind of sits far back from the parking lot and nestles into the trees. So we hope that the color changes and the material changes will make it blended even better. May I answer any questions?
Great, thank you for that presentation. And it's a very thorough set. I appreciate all the images and different sections and things. Any questions for the applicant, Mr. Radnich?
Yeah, thank you for your presentation. I am just curious, it's just really out of curiosity, why aren't you also proposing modifications to the other building if the buildings are connected by a covered system?
We're only planning on occupying the building that we're modifying, and we're not sure what we're going to do with the other one yet as far as renting it out or whatnot. So once a specific user comes along, if they're wanting changes or so forth, we do them at that time, but it didn't make sense to do them at this time.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Mason? Oh, you're still muted.
I like what you're doing with the property, Del Valle 79, so I won't hold that against you. And I'm old enough to remember back when that was Spruzzo, which is still one of my all-time favorite restaurants. So I recognize a lot of that rooftop equipment, but good luck to you and welcome to the Lafayette business community.
Thank you.
Any questions for the applicant? Okay, great. Do we have any public comment on the item? No?
Taking a quick look through the planner inbox. Just want to double check.
No public comment.
Okay, thank you. All right, well, usually we have public comment and then there's something to respond to, but, and so you have, the applicant has time for a rebuttal. Is there anything else that you want to add or anything you forgot?
Look forward to get going.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so we'll bring it back to the commission. I'll just recap what we're tasked with here tonight. Decision on land use permit and decision on whether to take action on the design review component, require the DRC to forward a recommendation back to the planning commission, or require the DRC to review as a condition of approval. Staff's recommendation is that we take full action on the application tonight. So we'll start with, is anyone unable to make any of the land use findings? He nods, okay. Any comments on the exterior improvements and thoughts on the question of design review commission review? Or the design design review findings?
So I would say I think we can make the decision at this time. That would be my opinion on that. I just generally, I think it's an improvement of what's there. And I'm happy for them to move forward. That's where I am now.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Maggio?
Yes, this is a project that I saw last week or reviewed with staff via ARC, and recommended that both issues come directly to the Planning Commission rather than the modest remodel have to go to DRC. Since we had to make the determination on the land use, I thought it was much more efficient if we would just make the decision on both tonight.
Okay. Okay, any other comments? Okay. Well, I had some design comments, so I'll just make them as a suggestion because I'm sensing from the commission that everyone is accepting of the total proposal.
Hey, Chair, could I interrupt? I'm sorry. My computer,
sure,
I think, is going to go out.
Okay.
I apologize. I'm just giving you a heads up. My computer is telling me it has to restart. So if I go dark, I will come back on as quickly as I can. I am in support of the project, and I will leave any architectural to you more schooled people. So I will get back on if you see me go dark. That's all. Thanks.
Okay, thanks for letting us know. Yeah, I was just going to say that when I went out to the site this weekend, I appreciate that the applicant is wanting to give the building a facelift and add additional wood details and soften it. And I liked all of that language about making it more pedestrian friendly. So my 2 cents is when I went out, I actually like the way that it looks now, and the rendering, I mean, it's all minor modifications, but I think what was sort of sticking in my head and looking at the rendering of the proposal was that at least the front element seems like sort of in the Greek revival architecture style. And so I was thinking that if I was sitting on the DRC, what I would probably like to see is keeping the stucco, or maybe doing like horizontal siding on the body of the building and then differentiating the columns, maybe with, adding the trim color or some detail. And yeah, that's just, I guess that's my suggestion, but seeing as everyone else is feeling comfortable with it, I'm not, I don't feel that I need to push for this to go to DRC or for design review changes. And the other comment was, I mean, it's not highly visible, but also having the wood shingles along the front and then terminating right after the corner, I thought was not a great detail, but again, you're not on Mount Diablo, and you know, it's not highly visible, so. So with my comments made, are there any additional comments, or does anyone like to make a motion?
I'll make a motion. I propose we approve, well, I can make all the findings, just state that. I think I would categorize this as a modest, if not minor, very modest addition, and I think it looks, it fits well on the site. And the comment I made earlier that it's in front of the existing garage, I think it's out of the creek setback from what I'm hearing, and the city engineer is going to look into that a little more. So I'd like to make a motion that we approve Planning Commission Resolution 2020-13 and find the project exempt from CEQA, subject to conditions.
I'll second that.
All in favor?
I,
I,
Any opposed? Okay, motion carries unanimously.
Great, thank you very much.
Congratulations. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Good evening.
Okay, this is usually when someone asks for a bathroom break. Does anyone need?
I'll just add something, if I may, Chair, to the previous item. There's a 14-day appeal period to the City
Right.
Council.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
take a 5-minute break because the next one might go long.
Okay, sure. Let's take a 5-minute break. So it's 9:23. We'll be back around 9:28.
Welcome back, Stephen.
I'm not going to use my work computer anymore. That caught me off guard. I'm just curious. I'm on my iPad now. Is there I might just try this from now on, but I also do all my notes on this. So I'm not sure how that'll work. Can you still see me right now?
No, we see your name.
Could you see me at all?
I saw your image moments ago. Now I see your image again.
Oh, okay. All right. That's a problem. So if I go to my notes, I guess all right. My work computer is going through, I guess it had to reset. So it's at 30%. It'll probably be 10 minutes. Maybe I'll just stay on this. And do you know if I try to log on twice, if I can do that, then cancel out on one? Or I'll just try.
I believe you should be able to.
Okay. Sorry about that.
Not to worry.
All right. I'm assuming that one passed.
Correct. Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll let you, in case you need a little break.
Thank you. Chair Sturm, I believe everyone is back.
Oh, okay, I didn't see Commissioner LaBonge. Okay. All right, so we're reconvening and we are on to item 7C, Hillside Development Permit 2519, Devin Watley owner, LR 10 zoning. And Nancy, Greg?
I'm going to let in the applicant team.
Okay.
So for the benefit of those who just arrived, the Watley application is up and the chair called for a staff report.
Welcome, everyone.
Good evening, commissioners. The item before you is a hillside development permit for 1182 Camino, Vallecito. The applicant is also requesting permits for design review, exceptions from the class 2 protected ridgeline setback, and to exceed the 15-degree declination requirement, as well as grading. The project proposes to demolish an existing 3,600 square foot, one-story, single-family residence to construct a 8,000 square foot, two-story single-family residence, resulting in a net increase of 4,400 square feet. Development includes approximately 4,000 cubic yards of earth movement, expansion of the driveway, private pool, and associated landscaping. No work is proposed to the existing 1,200 square foot detached barn located north of the primary structure. The 13-acre parcel is zoned single-family residential R10 within the Hillside Overlay District and has a Class 2 ridgeline traversing the property. The proposed replacement building will be sited mostly within the already developed area, with the added footprint located away from the Class 2 ridge and toward the less prominent Class 3 side. The new structure will be 27 feet 8 inches in height, and although more than doubling in size, the total square foot is commensurate to the site size, which is larger than most parcels in the area. 4 trees will be removed to widen the roadway for fire access and construct the new building. The structure will be concealed due to its distance from neighboring homes, as well as existing proposed vegetation. Since publication of the staff report, the department received the city consultant arborist review. Some recommendations include spacing out the recently planted 6 succession oaks to a minimum of 25 feet apart, planting additional oaks north of the existing stand of Monterey pines west of the residence, and removal of dead Monterey pines. Staff also received 7 additional comments expressing support, which have been forwarded to the commission earlier today. During tonight's hearing, staff received 2 additional comments. One from Suman and Seema Mazudar. Hi, we got the notice of public hearing regarding 1182 Camino Vallecito project by mail as we live in Camino Vallecito. This is the first time I've joined such a public hearing, and I'm listening to your hearing on YouTube right now. I understand that I have to submit my questions before the discussions. My discussions are straightforward. I see the project is a significant building expansion. The new building is over 8,000 square feet. That requires a significant amount of earth movement that requires exceptions being granted. That suggests the request is an extraordinary one. I have concerns about this request because of the steep hill on the east side of Camino Vallecito is steep and susceptible to landslides and land movement. Shifting a large volume of earth there may compromise the integrity of the hill, the road, Camino Vallecito, and houses on the other side of the road. Could you please explain what the steps the city has taken to study these geological issues? What rights do neighbors have to see those studies? Thanks, Suman Mazumdar. The second comment I received, Planning Commission from Peter K. Clark. These comments are only from one director of Happy Valley Improvement Association, not the HVIA as a whole. Number 1, this project is in your face visible from Happy Valley Road, a little below Sundown Terrace, but so is the old house. The viewpoint in the house are at about the same altitude as on the USGS Briones Valley Quadrangle. It is not clear what the right thing to do is. This strengthens my view that the Muni Code needs to be more explicit about the ridgeline properties with grandfathered buildings. Number 2, the story pole setup is inadequate. Maroon and dark blue strips are a poor substitute for bigger and much brighter orange flags. I think this is a good project, but we should have high standards for all projects. So the scofflaws that want to build ridgeline monstrosities can't argue for less visible story poles. The department is supportive of the Hillside development and related requests, recommending that the commission consider recent arborist comments and modifying the proposed exterior color to a darker shade so that the building does not stand out against the vegetation on the ridge. The department is able to make the required findings and recommends approval with conditions for the following reasons. It proposes the mass and scale that is compatible with the neighborhood and consistent with the residential guidelines. The project is consistent with objectives and policies of the general plan. It meets all applicable requirements of the zoning code. This concludes my presentation. I'm available for questions.
I couldn't hear very well. Nancy, did you say that that concluded your presentation?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for staff? Commissioner Heising?
Yeah, just one quick question. And then before I ask my question, I just want to state for the record that when I visited the site, I spoke with Mr. Field, one of the neighbors on Camino Vallecito, and when I was out at the site, and he's also one of the neighbors that sent a letter in support of the project, and his is one of the few houses that has visibility of the project from Camino Vallecito. And also I spoke to the renter inside the house, and when I went up to the top to visit the site, she came out and we spoke for a brief moment. So my only question is the scale, the size of the house relative to others. Sometimes when we see applications like this, there's an area comparison map, and maybe that's coming in the applicant's presentation. But I was just curious if staff knew just ballpark what range of homes are in the area square footage wise, and if this fits within the range.
I don't have those numbers right now, but I can take a look at it and respond later.
Okay. Any other questions, Commissioner Heising? No. Okay. Questions from other commissioners? Okay, and then it sounded like we've already gone through the public comment. Or I guess it's still, the public comment period is still open. Okay, so we have 10 minutes for a presentation from the applicant.
May I share my screen?
Sure.
All right, while Julie's doing that, I thought I would introduce ourselves. Hi, this is Devin Watley. This is my wife, Bhargavi. Thank you all for hearing our application. I grew up in Lafayette. I went to Spring Hill, Stanley, Aquilani's, class of '87. Bhargavi and I moved back to Lafayette in 2008. We've got a 4th grader and a 1st grader, both at Burton Valley. We love this city. My mom still lives here. And when we got the great fortune to build our dream home, we wanted to do something beautiful, elegant, and completely sustainable. In fact, we're hoping that it's the most sustainable house ever built in the city. We also wanted a home that was loved by the neighbors, which is why we have something like 15 letters of support for the project. And the 2 new comments that came this evening are certainly ones that we would consider. But I think overall, we've got a lot of support out there. We hired a renowned local architect to design what we hope is going to be one of his masterpieces when it's all said and done. We've worked really hard over 3 years on the design, painstakingly trying to think through every detail. We're incredibly proud of the result, which we think is quite special, and we hope you'll agree. And with that, I'll just turn things over to the artist behind it all. Bob.
This, but let's go to the first slide, Julie. Okay, so for those of you who have seen the site, you know this. There is a home on the site. It's at the top of the hill. It's about 1,000-foot driveway to get to the building site, and the building itself is surrounded by a driveway, completely around the entire building, which is something we were very mindful of when we started the project, that there was so much asphalt surrounding the building. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, so the first thing that we did is we analyzed the site, as we always do. And we looked at sunlight, we looked at the grades, the topography, the tree screening, we looked at access, the asphalt road that goes all the way around the whole building. And interestingly, more than probably any project we've ever worked on, we also looked at wind, because it's a very windy site. You can see where the wind is coming from. And that has a lot to do with livability on that site. And we also looked at the views, which are the photographs that surround this image. Okay, from there, our first strategy was to limit the amount of pavement that goes around the building. So we studied hose distances and driveway distances and found that we could reduce by probably 1/4 to 1/3 the amount of asphalt that goes around the building. Then we did an analysis of ways of laying out the building on the site, and they all started to lead to one, let's call it archetypal plan idea, which is basically an H-shaped plan. It's plan little e, bottom right, bottom center. And what the H-shaped plan does, it allows for 2 courtyards. So it allows for a courtyard on the west side, which is the entry side. We made it the entry side, and that's the windy side of the building. And allows for a courtyard on the east side, which would be shaded, sheltered from the wind, and that's where all of the outdoor activities would take place. And there's a green area right in the middle, which I'll show you on another slide, but something we're very proud of. And it was an early design concept to take the garden from outside and bring it inside the building to surround the main living space, so that you actually feel in your building like you're in a garden, so that this building would probably dissolve the boundary between inside and outside in a stronger way than we've ever achieved before. And that's how the plans have developed from this early sketch. So this is the basic footprint of the building, and that's in sort of the medium tone gray. And right below it, you can see the footprint of the building that's there right now. And the point of this is that we are using the building pad. We're not moving off of the building pad. The grades are very, very steep in all directions. So we're using that building pad. Next slide. And so this is my early sketch plan of the ground floor plan. And what this shows is that all the bedrooms on the main level of the house are on the north side of the building. And on the southeast side of the building are all of the areas we call public spaces, living, dining, kitchen, family, breakfast area. And they all look out to the east side, where there are protected outdoor areas, patios, decks, and swimming pool. And the southwest side is the parking area, and the entry side of the building, that's the windy side of the building. Okay, and you can see that garden idea it's evolving and evolving, and it's really become something. Okay, next slide. Okay, this is a very simple section, a transverse section, which goes through the hillside and the building, and it shows that the building is 27 feet 10 inches high, which is a little more than 2 feet below the height limit. Okay, and this is how the architecture has developed. Here are 4 views. So the one on the upper left is from the south, and the south is actually a hill that goes higher than the building site. And so from up on that hill, you can look down and you can see the east edge of the building, and the east edge of the building is the outdoor spaces, the terraces, decks, and swimming pool. The view to the right is an elevation of the building facing those terraces and swimming pool. So that's facing the east. Okay. The bottom left is the west elevation. That is the windy elevation, and it has a courtyard right in the center where you enter the building, parking directly on the right side where you see the garage. And then the bottom right-hand image is the courtyard entry. So this is what you would see after you park your car and you enter the building. Okay. Now, we had a meeting with the neighbors. We invited all the neighbors to come. I mean, the turnout was probably the largest I've ever seen for a house. We probably had 25 people there. we did not hear one negative comment. We presented this design as you see it today. We did not hear one negative comment. In fact, what we heard was a lot of really great support for this. And it was really heartening. We were very proud that all the neighbors who live nearby couldn't wait to see this building get built. And we're very proud of that. We also studied the site from off-site views, and we were trying to find places where we could see the building. So the first one was Highway 24. And so the upper right photograph is the site with all the trees, and the left one, the left photograph is what the site would look like after the building's built. And we actually have modeled that in that image, and you can't see it. The next set of slides and below that, on the right side, that's a view from Oakwood Athletic Club. And on just to the left of it is the exact same view with the building rendered, and you cannot see it, okay, from there. But we were thinking, aha, where can we see this from? We thought, well, maybe closer up in the neighborhood. So we went and we looked at several different places. We looked at views from 1115 Camino Vallecito. We thought we'd be able to see that, and you can see the slide on the upper right, and the slide on the upper left actually has the building rendered in it, and you can't see it. The next one was 1147 Camino Vallecito, and that's right, the second set of slides. Again, we looked up into the trees, we rendered the building, we can't see it. We looked on North Peardale. We thought we might be able to see it from 3926 North Peardale. And again, we could not see the building, see the trees as you kind of go up that driveway. The trees are in the background, cannot see the building there. And then we thought, well, for sure we'd be able to see it from 1199 Cambridge because it's next door and about at the same level. But there's so much foliage that when we rendered the building, we could not see it. Okay, after the story poles went up, Julie went out. Julie, who's our project architect and managing the screen right now, she went out, she looked at all of these views again to see were we right? Because you never, you do your best to project these and to be as honest as you can be about what you see. But the story poles tell you what's really going on. And her findings were that actually the building site was more secluded because landscape had grown up in the last 2 years. Okay, we're going to go to finishes for a second. So this is a slide that shows the east elevation of the building and has all the different finishes on it. So the finish on the left is travertine, which is a classic stone. I think every IMP building uses travertine. We use it a lot on many buildings. There's a finish to the right of that is Pammy gravel, which we use for roofs. I don't think anyone can see the roof of this building, but it has about 5 different colors inside that gravel. The center color is the aluminum for doors and windows, which is a dark bronze. The next one over to the right is very unique products called Prodema. It's actually very thin veneer of wood, very thin, on a bake-like panel that's then set in a resin, and it needs 0 maintenance. So you can have wood siding on your building and never have to maintain it. Okay, and then the final finish on the right is a drive-it stucco finish, and it's called Prairie Clay. And I want to just give you a little background about these finishes. I know that staff and the town's position is buildings should be dark to receive. We totally get that. We appreciate it. We honor that. We think that the building finishes that we're showing you are very natural and feel right on the site. And we'd like you to at least consider that. I'd like to just go to the next slide below that. Okay, so these are some like precedents for us. The upper left photograph is of a building I designed 25 years ago. It's where I'm sitting right now. This is our family home. And that was the first time we used this finish. And that's what it looked like. And if you look at the slide below it, the reason we selected that finish was because, and it wasn't because of design review, there was no design review for this home, but it was because it came so close to the color of the hills in the summer and the fall months. So for at least half or more than half the year, it looked a lot like the hills that we look at. And it felt very natural and right while still being architecture next to nature. In more recent years, we have used similar finishes. So the slide on the upper right is a building which is under construction right now. That's the Lee House on Happy Valley Road, and it's under construction, almost finished, uses the exact same stucco color, stucco finish. Wood tones are pretty similar. And so it's a continuation of that idea of a finish that we think is really beautiful. And then we did the Morley house, which is not the same color, but it's very similar. It had a little more green, a little more ochre in it, a little bit more southwest actually. But it also, it's about the same amount of reflective value. So it's about the same, amount of brightness. We think that these are very natural looking buildings for the town. So anyway, we'd like you to at least consider that. I know there's a condition that's been listed of making it darker. We'll work with the town, whichever way you feel we should. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Okay, so I wanted to mention sort of one last thing, well, not exactly last thing, but very close. And that is that not only is the building almost, I don't want to say invisible because that can't be correct, but it's not easy to see this building, and it's not even easy for the owner to see it. So after they drive up their 1,000-foot long driveway and they get to the Y where they go to the right to get to their front door, they can only see the small portion where you see the little green flags, which is the bedroom wing. They can't really see it most of the time while they're driving up to their own house. I really feel that most people will see this house for the first time when they go to dinner there. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Okay, so we received a photograph today from one of the commissioners, and it was a photograph of the site, and there was concern that, looking at this site, maybe, well, there was concern about some of the tree placements of some oaks that had been planted, and concern that maybe the office would be very visible. That's on the north side of the project. And there would be a lot of glass that you could see from this site. We didn't know where this was taken from, but we had guessed that it was taken from 1103 Rahara, because we found a very similar view from there. And we just did this afternoon trying to figure out, could you really see it and what did it look like? So Julie was able to add, now I don't believe this is where the photograph was taken, but we tried our best to find out where it was. And this is what we came up with. So this is at 1103, and we went to Google Earth and we studied the elevations of it and the angle between the buildings. And this is what Julie came up with. And it's hard for me to see that part of the screen because it's covered up with everybody in the meeting. But what it shows is that from this location, the only thing that can possibly be seen is the corner of the garage, which is a solid wall on the right side, and a garage door, which is solid on the left side. And there's no other part of the building that can be seen. Now, I was told right before the meeting that no, the photograph came from Upper Happy Valley Road. Now, I believe that since Upper Happy Valley Road is lower than Rahara, that when you look up to the site, you will see less of the building because there's more land in front of the building to block the view of the building. So I don't think it would be any worse than what we're showing you here. I actually think it would be better. Anyway, that's our feeling about that. Okay, and so, the building, I don't want to ever say it's invisible, but it's very hard to see it. And the screening exists already. And this is just with everything we've shown you, this is screening that exists. And so all of the new screening that Joe Huddle has planned, landscape architect, is only going to enhance this and also make sure that it stays screened for the life of the building, life of the project. Okay, let's go to the last one. Thanks, Julie. Okay, so I just wanted to mention, this is such an honor for us to work on a project which is so sustainable. We're very proud of this. There are so many items on this list, sustainability strategies, which go so far beyond building codes, county codes, building green codes. It's probably the most sustainable building I have ever had the privilege of working on, just starting off with it being a net zero building. Some people say you can't have a sustainable building if it's a big building. This is a good size home, but it's net zero. It produces all the energy that it uses. It's almost an all electric house, very little natural gas, maybe not any by the time we're through with this. We're using building materials that our firm has never had a chance to use, like Bamcor for framing and cross-laminated timbers. We're low indoor and outdoor water use. There's so many. You really should take the time to go through this list. As I say, it's the most sustainable building we've ever worked on. I think it will be, I hope it will be the most sustainable building in the town of Lafayette, something that we can really be proud of. So that's our presentation, and thank you. I hope it didn't go over my time. Thank you.
Thank you. That was great. Any questions for the applicant? Commissioner Mason?
First of all, I'd like to say it was an excellent presentation. I like what you did with the house. And I really appreciate that you reached out to the community. I wish more of our applicants did that. I just wanted to ask you a couple questions, mostly just to get things on the record. One of the people wrote in, they had questions about the grading. Am I correct in assuming that you will be, a geotechnical engineer will be reviewed to help facilitate with the grading and the foundation design for your residents?
Absolutely, 100%. It's always the case.
And then the other thing I noticed from the photo where you came up the driveway to the Y, it looked like you had some low-hanging branches for fire trucks. I think you have to have like 14-foot access. You'll be working with an arborist for trimming those oaks.
Yes, we are, as well as the driveway, at the 1,000-foot driveway as well. We have to provide that headroom for the entire driveway. Yes, that's correct.
No other questions for me. And by the way, I like the house you have behind you. My wife would be jealous.
Any other questions for the applicant? Commissioner Heising?
Yeah, thank you for that presentation. Very thorough. Appreciate it. I only had two questions. One was regarding a comment that was made earlier by one of the public commenters about addition of trees, or the trees that were planted looking kind of in a row. So I guess my question is, when the landscape architect is filling out or finishing off the design around the home, is there a way to address that and throw a couple more trees down there so that it takes away from that row look? I see a head nod, so that's great. And then on lighting, I noticed there was, I think the condition or the staff report mentioned dark sky lighting. So that would be light shining up. But my question is more the reverse. What about light shining down the hill? So if the people that are living below that elevation, which is pretty much everyone around there because you're on the top of the hill, are there going to be shields on those lights so that the light isn't shining down the hill at night?
Yeah, so it's a very good question, and we run into this all the time when we do a building which is elevated above other buildings. So probably the worst thing that you can do, and is a very popular thing to do, is to have indirect lighting. Let's say wall sconces that light up a ceiling. That's the worst thing you can do, because then people are always looking up at a white ceiling that is glowing, okay, or even a wood ceiling which is glowing. So what we do is we have deep recessed downlights. Okay, they are shielded because they're downlights and they're recessed and they're deep. And that's our technique. That's the best way to light a building which is up on a hill. And we've done this for years and years, and we've done it successfully.
Okay, great. And then what about outdoor lighting?
Exactly the same thing. Everything is shielded. All outdoor lighting is shielded. No lighting up trees, no lighting up walls or anything like that.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and just on that row of oak trees, so we planted those about 1.5 years ago just to start to get ahead of the succession planning there. And absolutely, we can, I put them in with my daughter, so we can definitely fill that out in a more natural looking way. So for sure.
Great, thank you very much.
On our plan, they were a little bit more staggered. They should be staggered.
Commissioner Maggio?
Thank you. Excellent presentation, incredible design, and you did answer most of the questions in your presentation. Are you going for a LEED or another rating system with this particular project?
Okay, that's a good question. This is really up to Devin, Devin and Bargeby, if they actually want to take the step and go for LEED so that they can have the plaque, or whether they're just satisfied doing it. I mean, I believe, but Devin should answer that his goal is to be sustainable. I don't know if it's to be recorded I don't know, Devin, maybe you have something to say about
Yeah, I mean, looking at your list, you're very capable of doing net zero or something even better. So
Yeah.
I'm a lead AP and I work, in fact, my home is the 1103 Rahar and it's a sustainable home.
Oh, great. Yeah,
So I'm
we're
waving
very
at
much,
you from across the valley. But I've got the Lafayette Eco House. So I'm always happy to have someone join the ranks of sustainable homes in Lafayette. First time I've ever seen a sparkling story poles, so that's a very bold gesture. You weren't afraid to show it off. In 20 years, it's the first time I've ever seen sparkling story poles that glisten. Probably scare the birds away. And I want to say I do like the color palette. I'm really particular about color, and my house is matched against the bark of an oak tree. But the hills are gold, and I like the colors because I don't think they would be reflective at all, and I think they would blend into the hillside. So it's my comment. I encourage you to go for a rating if you can.
thank you. Yeah, no, the intention was to build the house to LEED Platinum standard. And I'd love to talk with you more about the rating itself.
Any other questions? Okay. Have we received any public comment?
I will check.
Nothing additional. But I want to circle back on the previous comment or question about the percentage of development in the surrounding parcels. Let me just pull that up. It ranges from 2 to 13%. But if you exclude this outlier, the average development is about 10% of the lot size. But most lots are much less than this lot, and it's less than 3 acres.
So thanks for that. I was more angling for a flavor of the size, the square footage of the home rather than the lot.
This is the percentage of the home in relation to the lot.
Okay. Do you have an idea of what the how 8,000 square feet compares to other homes in the area? Or other homes, is it within the range? Is 8,000?
It's much less. Currently, the existing home is less than 1% of the entire lot, but with the new home, it's 1%.
Commissioner Heising.
Yeah, I think, yeah.
Setting aside the floor area ratio, which Lafayette does not use except in the MRA multifamily zoning district, I should be able to pull up that exhibit for you.
Okay, I was just trying to get a general sense of, is this house larger than the others or in line with all the other houses in the neighborhood? That was simply as that.
It would be the largest house in the area, but it is very much the largest lot in the area as well.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
I was going to say the last exhibit Nancy had up has the square footages on there. So if you expand it, you can see it.
I can't read it. I don't know how to expand it.
Nancy is going to have to expand it on her PDF.
I'll offer to show this, which is living area, so it's not inclusive of garages, but they range, from 6,000 down and 4,000 down and 5,000. For some reason, this very large lot just to the east does not have a size indicated with it, but these are the living areas. So you'd want to add on 400 to 800 square feet, depending on the number of garages.
Okay, thank you for that.
Okay, any other questions? And I assume no other public comments come in from a minute ago. Okay, so that was a very thorough presentation. Typically, you'd have a rebuttal period after a public comment. Is there anything else that the applicant or any of their team would like to say?
The only thing I would just add is there were a number of additional letters from or emails from neighbors that came in over the last 4 or 5 days, which were intended to be part of the public comment. And I'm not sure if those are supposed to be read or anyway, I'm not sure what the process is on that or if it matters, but.
We just wanted to make sure you guys received it, yeah.
We did get, I think, all of those letters. Staff always forwards them to us. And for this meeting is a little different than our last meeting, but is our typical process is that anything sent to staff prior to the meeting is then forwarded to us. And if we're having an in-person meeting, we provide copies, and then the staff's reading public comments that come in during the meeting.
Okay,
got it.
So we've seen all the letters that you're referring to.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. All right, would anyone, so we're now back to commissioner deliberation. We're reviewing the proposal against the findings for a Hillside development permit for a previously developed site, a ridgeline exception, development extending above the 15-degree declination line, design review, and grading permit. Does anyone have any comments on their ability to make the findings or any revisions to the conditions of approval? Comments on staff's comments on the color and materials? Commissioner Heising?
Yes, thank you. Just regarding the grading, and I think this point was made in the presentation, and Commissioner Mason brought it up as well. I think the earthwork is limited as much as it can be, and I appreciate the fact that it's built on the existing pad. I mean, if this house was built not on the existing pad, there'd be substantially more grading involved. So I think it's situated in probably the most I don't want to use the word perfect, but in one of the better spots to limit grading. And then regarding the color of the home, I tend to agree with Commissioner Maggio. I think, and also the architect, when he made his presentation, the grass color of the hill, even though there's dark trees up there, and I understand where staff's recommendations coming from with the darker color, the grass on the hill is going to be light for a big part of the year. And then also, since it is on the top of the hill, you have the backdrop of the house, or not of the house, but of the sky. So that's a lighter color as well. So I think it'll tend to blend in, and I'm fine with, personally, with the color scheme and the that's being proposed by the applicant. So those are my comments at this point.
Any other comments? Commissioner Farsad?
I think it's a large house, but I don't think it's large for where it is, especially with the size of the property. I love the design of the building. I think it's gorgeous. Setting everything else aside, I would also defer to the architects and the property owners' color choices. I think they work up there. So I'm not an architect. As a layman, I just think it looks good and could blend in.
Thank you. Commissioner Badnich?
I really like the project. I can make all the findings, and I do understand staff's recommendation for darker colors. However, I support the project colors as presented.
Thank you. Commissioner Mason?
I also support the staff's, the colors as presented. In my time here, this has to be the least visible 8,800 square foot house we've ever come across. So to quibble about colors, especially when the architect and the owner have done such a wonderful job, to me seems pointless.
Thank you. Commissioner LeBlanc, did you have any comments?
Reiterating some of the things. One of them was I appreciate how proactive the applicant team were on reaching out to the neighbors. I think that's from our point of view, seeing all those letters of support makes this, much easier to go through. I think it's a phenomenal looking house, and I was very interested to read on your net zero and trying to learn that. I noticed it said I think you'll review the gray water or the purple water. Maybe I'm phrasing that wrong. I'd be curious to know how that ends up, but I'm in terms of the color schemes, I think everyone said enough on that. I think what they've had looks fine to me. So I am prepared to vote on this and make all the findings in support. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Everyone's said anything that I was going to say, so I'm ready to entertain a motion. Commissioner Radnich?
Okay, I move that we adopt resolution 2020-11, finding the project exempt from CEQA and approved per the conditions presented, with the exception of keeping color as presented in the existing project proposal.
Second.
Who's second by Commissioner Maggio?
Yes.
Right, okay. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Congratulations.
Thank you very, very much.
Great work.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, everyone.
Thank you so
Thanks.
much.
Thank you.
Enjoy your home.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Okay, we are on to item 8A, ARC volunteer for May 15th. Do you guys have any sense of, well, never mind.
Is it 9:30 normal time? I can do it.
Okay, thanks, Commissioner Farsan. Item 9, Commissioner reports. Okay, seeing none. Item 10, Planning Director's report. We can't hear you. Still mute. There you go.
That was the best report ever.
Noted. At the last city council meeting, the city council received an update on Plain Area 2050 and the RENA methodology committee status that the planning commission had received the week prior. Planning staff introduced the California Building Code updates, which will come back for a public hearing at the next meeting. And the city council adopted the California Fire Code, which also became effective January 1st of this year. So we're catching up on those, which were provided to us very late in the year for adoption. PG&E provided an update on its gas line replacement in St. Mary's Road, and on the 13th, they had debuted a proposal to remove roughly 80 trees along St. Mary's Road in conjunction with its enhanced vegetation management program, which goes beyond its annual vegetation management program. And so the city attorney's office is reviewing a letter from PG&E, which asserts that our tree ordinance is preempted by the CPUC. And so we'll provide an update when we have more information on that. The accessory dwelling unit regulations, which the Planning Commission endorsed, were adopted at the second reading. So those will become effective in a few weeks. And then coming up next week, the subcommittee to the council liaisons to the Design Review Commission will make a recommendation to appoint a new member to the Design Review Commission, filling one of the 2 vacancies. The council will receive the same report on the housing element annual progress report that was passed by the commission this evening on consent. And thereafter we'll submit it to HCD and OPR. The Planning Commission previously endorsed prohibition on short-term rentals, and that ordinance will go to the council next Monday night, along with a project known as the West End, which was a 4-story project just west of the city offices, which is proposing 4 stories and via a density bonus. And then hopefully you have on your calendars at 7 p.m. Reviewing with the city council the planning department's annual report and work plan. So essentially prioritizing those things which are not routine planning applications, but are advanced planning efforts or code updates, other initiatives. So we will publish that in the next 2 days, so you can review it. After this meeting, I will confirm all the links are hot for the Terraces of Lafayette staff report, and that'll be published today. And a notification will go out to interested parties tomorrow. So in 2 weeks on the 18th, we'll be hearing on the Terraces of Lafayette project.
Great. Are we going to have any closed session prior to the public hearing?
I will inquire with the city's attorney on that.
And if we are going to have a closed session, does it have to be, could it be like earlier, like a week earlier than?
It could.
Yeah.
It need not have to be that evening. And
Okay.
probably not, so that it's not a extraordinarily lengthy meeting.
Okay. And I was asking because if possible, I felt like last time we had the closed session right before and we had to digest information. So giving us a little time to think about things while we're reviewing the other materials would be helpful.
Right now.
Commissioner Heising and then Commissioner Mason.
Yeah, just a quick question. Did we hear back? The mayor's letter went to the governor's office. Was there any response to that? And I believe I read the letter, but I believe there were questions regarding land use decisions to be made. And if COVID and the shelter in place has, at least from the governor's office, has he responded to the letter, I guess is my question.
Not to my knowledge, no.
So we're proceeding with all land use applications, normal course.
Normal under the shelter in place, correct. So the other aspects of state law have been relaxed or deadlines relaxed. Not so with the annual housing report for the housing element. Not so with statutory deadlines associated with development applications. So in order to meet our statutory timelines, we must move forward with having public hearings on applications which have been submitted and deemed complete, not unlike this evening's. So to my knowledge, the governor's office has not responded to the mayor's letter, and no changes in the most recent orders that would affect our statutory obligations with respect to timelines and processing applications in a timely fashion. The latest shelter-in-place order does reinstitute construction projects across the board. So,
Right.
provided that they have social distancing protocols in place, they're allowed to move forward again.
And I believe the league sent a similar letter that our mayor sent. So does staff know if the league heard back from the governor's office?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay. I mean, we know this information because we asked the question and we hear it in this meeting, and those that are in the public who happen to still be listening to this broadcast hear this, but I just wanted to make sure that that same information can get out to the rest of the public, and maybe that can be put into the staff report. I don't know, it may already be written there somewhere, but I just want to make sure people understand our requirements that we have to move forward with statutory deadlines.
And I'm happy to speak to that in the oral presentation, the staff report as well.
Okay, great, thank you.
Commissioner Mason?
If we are going to go into closed session, can you have legal staff just send us out a little bulletin point with the rules for closed session? The last one, out something, we read it, we had to hand it back. I mean, some of us, the way we're set up, can't promise that a kid isn't going to walk by behind us. And it's harder to keep everything confidential when some of our setups at home are in a living area, in contrast to a dedicated office where we can close the door.
Very good. Can do.
Okay. Commissioner Farsan?
So just following up on the issue of the letters to the governor, as I understand it, at least the governor did suspend some rules on timing with respect to CEQA. And I understand our next meeting relates to essentially an updated amendment, whatever you want to call it. We'll wait and see what we get. So does the new order from the governor not affect this issue with the CEQA report coming out? I'm assuming you said tomorrow and it's going to be heard on the 18th. Not putting you on the spot here, but I'm just wondering, relatedly, does that affect this next meeting for the terraces?
I will have to ask the city attorney about that. We've been in frequent communication over the last several days for sure. And so that has not been part of our staff report preparations. So
okay.
My initial reaction is that no, it does not affect it, but I will have him double check.
Sure. I mean, it's the order that came out on April 23rd.
What was the detail of that order?
It's essentially, it's just very much 30,000 foot view. The governor suspended certain timing requirements with respect to CEQA related reports, etc. And there's our expert with her hand up. So I would ask her.
I still think it's best to come from the city attorney. My understanding, though, is the CEQA related timelines are regarding to AB 52 and regarding hard copy noticing versus electronic noticing.
Okay. Thank you.
Commissioner Mason?
I don't know if you caught in the news about a week ago, City of Los Altos lost a lawsuit regarding processing of plans, and the judge specifically ruled that the mistakes by the city were not benign neglect. They were intentional and ordered the project to be approved. And, Los Altos is a community a lot like Lafayette. And apparently the judge did not have any sympathy for the city for their reasons for denying it.
I believe that article was linked by our communications analyst in a daily briefing. So if you're signed up for that, it might have been in there. I'll see if I can find it and forward it to you.
Okay, great. Anything else?
Not at this time.
We are adjourned, 10:26.
Thanks very much.
Good week, everybody.
Have a good night.
Good night.
Safe.